Thank you very much. Senator, the Honorable Dr. Amory Brown, Minister of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, Dr. Carla Barnett, Secretary General of the Caribbean Community and distinguished keynote speaker, other senior executives of the CARICOM Secretariat, members of the Diplomatic Corps, Dr. Kola Lewis Cameron, Dean, Faculty of the Social Sciences of the U.W.I St. Augustine Campus, Dr. Jacqueline LaGuardia Martinez, Senior Lecturer and Faculty Lead for this event, honorable chairs and distinguished panelists, special invited guests, colleagues and members of the St. Augustine community, students, other distinguished ladies and gentlemen, including members of the media, good morning. It is an honor and a pleasure to bring greetings from the Institute of International Relations and to chair this morning's proceedings. CARICOM at 50, a symposium to reflect on 50 years of CARICOM's history. In keeping with the mandate of the Institute of International Relations, we host various kinds of events to promote discussion and exchange of ideas on varied issues of relevance to international relations of the Caribbean and regional development. The diversity of issues on which we engage through these events highlights, among other things, the multidisciplinary nature of the IR's work and its ability to bridge the gap between theory, policy, and practice. Importantly, these events promote its public presence, generate knowledge, and advance the policy relevance of the IR's work. These initiatives are sometimes held collaboratively with individuals and organizations. Some examples of the latter include research and policy bodies, national and regional governmental and non-governmental organizations. On this occasion, we are honored to collaborate with the CARICOM Secretariat in keeping with this broad vision. Indeed, we are particularly pleased to be doing so for the 50th anniversary. This is indeed a momentous occasion, as CARICOM is the longest standing regional integration arrangement in the developing world. CARICOM indeed has much to teach us. Sincere thanks to the CARICOM Secretariat for the opportunity to collaborate on this symposium at this critical juncture in the history of the Caribbean community. So without further delay, I invite Dr. Kola Lewis Cameron, Dean of the Faculty of Social Sciences, to deliver welcome remarks on behalf of the U.W.I St. Augustine campus. Over to you, Dean.
Thank you very much, Dr. Montoute. Senator, the Honorable Dr. Amory Brown, Minister of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs. Her Excellency, Dr. Carla Barnett, Secretary General of CARICOM, members of the Diplomatic Corps, CARICOM representatives, distinguished panelists, and other invited guests, colleagues, friends of the IAR, ladies and gentlemen, a pleasant good morning. I am very pleased this morning to welcome you to this morning's momentous symposium commemorating CARICOM at 50, a joint event of the Institute of the International Relations and the CARICOM Secretariat. While I am not a numerologist, various expounders on the significance of the number 50 state that it symbolizes new beginnings. Although we are not at the starting line with what is described as the oldest surviving integration movement, the year 2023 compels us to stop, reflect, and determine what is required for the next 50 years and beyond. French painter Claude Monet told us it's on the strength of observation and reflection that one finds a way. So we must dig and delve unceasingly. As you know, the global pandemic has significantly changed the trajectory of lives, communities, nations, and regions. And as a region, we sadly suffered significant loss of life. We experienced a severe economic decline with a historic weakening of Caribbean tourism, one of the main sectors for the region. Moreover, close to 50% of micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises and business support organizations suffered closures of physical locations, and 47% temporarily ceased operations altogether, and this is according to the Caribbean Export Development Agency. However, I wish to echo the sentiments of the Honorable E.P. Shea Green, Minister of Foreign Affairs and Trade of Antigua and Barbuda, says that the pandemic has been an accelerant for change and has demanded of us as a region innovation, agility, and increased responsiveness. While the highest commendations must be given to CARICOM institutions such as CAFA, Impacts, SEDIMA, and others, certainly for their heroic contributions to regional coordination during times of crises, we must also, as stated by Prime Minister, the Honorable Ralph Gonsalves, recognize CARICOM's inbuilt and operational limitations. But today we are here to recognize the positives and look at ways CARICOM can facilitate increased innovation, agility, and responsiveness needed in a post-COVID context. Part of the core purpose of CARICOM is to create a community that is integrated, inclusive, and resilient. A community that is driven by knowledge, excellence, innovation, and productivity. As a regional learning and research institution, the U.W.I has and will continue to support CARICOM in its purpose. At her induction ceremony, our Pro-Vice Chancellor and Campus Principal of the U.W.I St. Augustine Campus, Professor Rosemary Bell Antwine, affirmed this when she said, "The U.W.I is the quintessential Caribbean citizen." She also noted that as scholars centered on solutions, our solutions must be interdisciplinary as well as collaborative. Moreover, her delivery stressed the importance of partnerships, stating that her philosophy has always been that a university, specifically this campus, must be entrenched in its community to have relevance within the community. And our intention as the Caribbean's #1 university, as she puts it, is not to retreat and become reactionary, but to be proactive thought leaders and problem solvers. We view CARICOM as a powerful force, which, like the University of the West Indies, brings together brilliant Caribbean minds to devise strategies, solutions, and institutions that will benefit all Caribbean people. And so today, we reaffirm our commitment to support CARICOM in its mandate as we also seek to increase innovation, agility, and responsiveness in our learning, in our teaching, and in our research activities. We continue to implement a people-centered approach to produce individuals who can think and act differently and foster innovation for the positive, and in some respects, I might say, radical transformation of Caribbean economies, of Caribbean systems and mindsets. As a faculty, our focus has been to be socially engaged and solutions-oriented, and today's symposium represents this. Events like this are designed to bring external and internal stakeholders together for rigorous academic and practical discussions that foster new thoughts and produce cutting-edge solutions. I want to congratulate my colleagues at the Institute for their foresight and for consistently scanning and analyzing the external environment for ways in which the institution can add value at both the macro and micro, national and regional levels. Our principal also spoke about the Institute as one of the unique strengths of the St. Augustine campus over the other U.W.I campuses. And I have been consistently pleased by all the activities emerging from the institution. And I thank you to the interim chair and colleagues at the Institute for your commitment to this overarching vision. Colleagues, in closing, congratulations to Dr. Carla Barnett, Secretary General, and the CARICOM Secretariat on this most commendable achievement of 50 years of existence. I trust that the two panel discussions will produce profound observations and reflections, and more importantly, yield perspectives on the way forward. A warm welcome to our presenters and participants, and I trust that you will have an engaging and most fruitful discussion the rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean, for providing the backdrop and context for the discussions which will follow later today at this symposium. Thank you also for your kind support of this event and the IRA's work overall. I now invite Senator the Honorable Dr. Amory Brown, Minister of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs, to bring remarks. Sir, we are delighted to have you and we are eager to hear what you have to say to us today. Mr. Minister, the floor is yours.
For your kind introduction and welcome. Your Excellency, Dr. Carla Barnett, the very distinguished Secretary General of the Caribbean Community, members of the Diplomatic Corps, Dr. Akola Lewis Cameron, Dean of the Faculty of Social Sciences of the University of the West Indies, St. Augustine, Dr. Anita Montout, Interim Director, Institute of International Relations at the University of the West Indies, St. Augustine, Senior Lecturer, Dr. Jacqueline LaGuardia Martinez, Mr. Winston Ducaran, one of my predecessors and very distinguished at that, Professor of Practice in International Diplomacy, Dr. Lancelot Cowie, Honorary Professor, Latin American Studies Program, Ms. Aisha Wharton, Director of the CARICOM Affairs Division of the Ministry of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs, other distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning to each and every one of you. It is truly my distinct honor to join with you today in delivery of remarks in recognition of a very momentous milestone in our region's history, the 50th anniversary of the Caribbean Community. CARICOM as an institution came into existence before the independence of many of the member states that comprise it today. Since its establishment, it has become the vehicle through which our collective development aspirations are espoused. Trinidad and Tobago is honored to have been the site of the signing of the most significant text, the original Treaty of Chaguaramas, which was signed here on October 4th, 1973. The treaty reflects the fervent desire, and I quote, to consolidate and strengthen the bonds which have historically existed among their people, as well as a common determination to fulfill the hopes and aspirations of their peoples for full employment and improved standards of work and living. CARICOM's founding fathers held this vision when they sought to strengthen the ties within the region to provide an avenue for sustained, functional cooperation toward security and economic prosperity. These ideals have since been deeply embedded in CARICOM's institutional mandate. While the significant role that CARICOM plays in the daily lives of our citizens sadly at times goes unnoticed, it is important for us to note that CARICOM has served as the birthplace where many of our regional institutions were born. Time would not permit me to list all of the 19 community institutions, the 4 functional corporation institutions, and the 6 associate institutions, but I will mention some of those which may be a bit familiar to highlight that over the years, many aspects of our development have been shaped by the policy direction and support provided by these very institutions. Some among these institutions have become so ubiquitous to community life that it would be difficult to imagine us without them. If the average citizen were asked to name a few, I'm sure that the Caribbean Examinations Council, CXC, the Caribbean Public Health Agency, CARFA, maybe partially thanks to the COVID-19 pandemic, and which has really played a key role in our survival through that pandemic, and CDEMA, the Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Agency, which continues to be at the forefront of our regional response to natural disasters, would be some of the first that our citizens would name. Others that might be mentioned include the Caribbean Community Climate Change Center, the 5 Cs, which provides vital direction on a range of issues, including the development of our region's position for climate change negotiations, and CARICOM Impacts, or regional security apparatus, which is so vital as we challenge those who are challenging our security arrangements. The work of our institutions must be lauded today as we commemorate this 50th anniversary celebration, and should be the focus of our attention moving forward. I'm certain that these institutions would continue to provide vital support in treating with our issues, our concerns, our priorities specific to our region and our developmental agenda. I must acknowledge the vital, critical role that the University of the West Indies, your propitious associate institution of CARICOM, has played and must continue to play in enhancing the proficiency of our young adults and also our more seasoned students, and in sharpening skills and talents in key areas across the Caribbean. It has become crucial to the national and regional growth and development of CARICOM. Beyond a doubt, many great minds have been cultivated through the U.W.I experience, including a number of past and current regional political leaders and cultural icons. I can name many, including Nobel laureate Derek Walcott and Professor Rex Nettleford. It is not beyond the realm of imagination to think that perhaps our future leaders may at this very moment be receiving tutelage at a U.W.I campus. I'll remove the word perhaps. I'm certain that they are receiving tuition at this time at U.W.I campuses. And as such, even including this distinguished Institute of International Relations. Indeed, U.W.I remains integral to the molding of the future of our region across a multitude of disciplines, and this should be applauded, recognized, and underscored at every opportunity. My friends, on this auspicious occasion, in which we are commemorating the 50th anniversary as a community, I believe it is fitting to rehearse the vision that undergirds our community. In CARICOM, we are seeking to build a community that is integrated, inclusive, and resilient, a community driven by knowledge, excellence, innovation, and productivity, where every citizen is secure and has the opportunity to realize her or his potential with guaranteed human rights and social justice. A community where citizens contribute to and share in its economic, social, and cultural prosperity. A community that is unified and a competitive force in the global arena. That is the vision that has brought us to this very point, and which I am assured will take us further into the future. In order for us to achieve these noble objectives, there must be strong coordination amongst our membership. Our heads of government meet regularly to discuss and advance the strategic direction of CARICOM, and I can certainly attest that the issues being considered are relevant to ensuring that our region remains secure, stable, and prosperous. Chief among these are the implementation of the CSME, climate change and its attendant issues, post-pandemic recovery, energy security, reform of international financial institutions, food security, and security matters. As you would be aware, Trinidad and Tobago will host next week a regional symposium on violence as a public health concern. One of the anticipated outcomes of bringing together our regional leaders and stakeholders in health, academia, civil society, and others is for us to develop a regional framework to treat with the root causes of criminal behavior. This serves to exemplify the ways in which CARICOM, supported very well by the CARICOM Secretariat and relevant CARICOM institutions, such as Impacts and CARFA, is committed to securing the lives and livelihoods of our peoples. At this 50-year juncture, I believe it is also an opportune time to reflect on and appreciate the gains from the last half-century of hard work. To assess the progress made toward realizing the vision, consider the challenges encountered, and to devise strategies to mitigate them as we look toward the next 50 years. In this vein, I wish to use the opportunity to celebrate just a few of the community's achievements to date. We can all celebrate the fact that we have a highly functional common market with goods, services, and capital moving with relative ease across national borders. The region boasts a healthy economic environment in which businesses, large and small, have been able to thrive. We can also highlight the fact that procedures have been implemented across member states to facilitate the free movement of community nationals. In this regard, passports issued by member states proudly bear two interlocking C's, which is the Caribbean Community logo, and all CARICOM nationals are accorded an automatic stay of 6 months when traveling across member states. This doesn't exist in many places in the developing world. We hail the reality that job seekers within the community have a wider range of opportunities from which to choose, as CARICOM nationals can seek employment across member states. And while this is currently linked to a specified set of categories, we are steadily working toward the implementation of measures that would allow for full free movement in the future. We, our children and grandchildren, will benefit from this. We applaud that CARICOM has established itself as a strong voice in the international arena, elevating regional concerns such as climate change and financing for development as priority issues in the multilateral sphere. And we celebrate our regional leaders who've taken leadership in raising those voices in those spaces. We rejoice in the benefits derived from South-South cooperation, proving that there are definite gains to be had from collaboration for small developing states like our own. We honor the community's voice that serves as a clarion call for reparation for slavery and the fight for justice against native genocide and the enslavement of African people and related matters. That, ladies and gentlemen, was just a very limited snapshot of the fruit produced by the diligence of our region's citizens, working in service of the vision laid down by our founding fathers and built upon by those who followed them. As you know, a strong family requires not just founding fathers, but strengthening sons and daughters. With this appreciation of accomplishment, we acknowledge the challenges that we have faced and the challenges that are to come. We recognize the need to find ways to make our free movement regimes more seamless, as well as the need to standardize procedures across member states to improve intra-regional business and trade. Trinidad and Tobago, my own country, is very much a part of these advancements. We also acknowledge that the pace at which decisions are implemented does not always coincide with the regional public demand. We recognize the need to implement changes that have a meaningful impact on the lives of citizens, such as improving regional transportation infrastructure and technological connectivity. We understand that the countries of our region, as members of the Global South, continue to contend with a plethora of challenges in our journey toward development. In recognition of these challenges, I offer to you my sincere commitment and that of the government of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago to continue our earnest engagement towards strengthening the relevant mechanisms within our community. We stand committed to bringing about the changes that would make a substantial difference in the standard of living and the quality of life for all of our people. My friends, ladies and gentlemen, as we look toward the next 50 years of building together as a community, let us remember the core values that have brought us thus far, the values of unity, equity, integrity, people-centeredness, good governance, and good environmental management. These values must continue to ground us as we seek ways to extrapolate the gains of the last 50 and accelerate the development of our region in a manner that we would be proud. We would be proud of the kind of community that we hand over to the next generation of integrationists. In closing these remarks, I wish to reiterate that reaching the 50-year milestone is indeed a significant achievement for CARICOM. As the oldest surviving integration movement in the developing world, it behooves us to honor the fruits of the labor of those who've gone before us with diligence and commitment to not only add, but to multiply them. It is an appropriate juncture at which to renew our commitment to achieving the community's objectives, always carrying with us the understanding clearly articulated by Dr. Eric Eustace Williams at the signing of the treaty in 1973. All our strength is in our union. All our danger is in discord. All our strength is in our union, and all our danger is in discord. So let us advance in strength together toward the next 50 years and beyond, and I congratulate the Institute of International Relations on this important event. I thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Honorable Minister, for highlighting the significance, contributions, and achievements of CARICOM to the region in the various fairs through its institutions, and for reinforcing and highlighting the importance of regional integration for the peoples of this region. And now we have come to the highlight of the program, the keynote address to be delivered by Dr. Carla Barnett, Secretary General of the Caribbean Community. Dr. Carla Natalie Barnett became the 8th Secretary General of the Caribbean Community on 15th August 2021. Dr. Barnett, an economist, has worked across CARICOM for over 30 years. She was the first woman to be appointed as Deputy Governor of the Central Bank of Belize and the first woman and youngest person to be appointed as Deputy Secretary General of CARICOM. She was also Vice President of Operations at the Caribbean Development Bank. As a consultant, Dr. Barnett has provided advisory services in public sector financial management and strategic planning throughout CARICOM. As a politician, Dr. Barnett contested the 2015 Belize general elections and was a senator and a minister of state in the Belize government from 2015 to 2020. She's an advocate for gender equality as the right thing to do to create a more stable and equitable society and as good economic policy. She has been an active member of the Belize chapter of the Caribbean Institute of Women in Leadership, a president of Belize Young Women Christian Association, and serves on the board of Haven House, a shelter for battered women. Dr. Barnett has received several awards, including the Commander of the British Empire for Distinguished Public Service. Dr. Barnett, it is a distinct honor to have you here today to deliver the keynote address. We look forward to hearing your unique insights as the head of this formidable organization. Congratulations to you and the CARICOM on your 50th anniversary. Madam Secretary General, the floor is yours to deliver the keynote address.
Thank you very much for that introduction. It's my pleasure to be here. Senator, the Honorable Dr. Amory Brown, Minister of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, Dr. Akola Lewis Cameron, Dean of the Faculty of Social Sciences, University of the West Indies, Dr. Montu, Director of the Institute of International Relations, University of the West Indies, St. Augustine, specially invited guests, and I have to say that I see among them several that I know from previous dispensations. I won't call all their names, but Professor Winston Ducaran, Ambassador Ivan Ogando, Professor Patsy Lewis are people whom I would have met before, and there are others. Ladies and gentlemen, this year marks significant anniversaries for both the Caribbean community and the University of the West Indies. As we celebrate the 50th and the 75th anniversaries respectively, phrases such as defining moment, critical juncture, turning point come to mind. One such phrase forms a part of the topic that I have been asked to address today, CARICOM at the crossroads, rising to the challenge of a new era. Indeed, as the Prime Minister of St. Kitts and Nevis, Honorable Terence Drew, at the opening ceremony of the 44th regular meeting of the conference in the Bahamas last February said, and I quote, "Our Caribbean community today stands at a crossroads where we must focus our attention on the myriad challenges confronting us as small island developing states and low-lying coastal communities in an ever-increasing volatile global environment," end of quote. He noted that the overlapping challenges are cross-cutting in their effect, impacting all sectors of the economy and forcing us to play catch-up as we advance our development agenda. From the lost ideal of a political federation to the reignition via free trade area, to the signing of the Treaty of Chaguaramas, which created the common market 50 years ago, the revised Treaty of 2001 pushed the boundaries of regional integration even further with the aim of creating a single market and economy. The Caribbean community has as its organizing principle the need, the desire, and the logic of our member states combining their resources, human, economic, and natural, to find common solutions to development challenges so as to accelerate development and create a viable and prosperous society. The objective is to build a sustainable community with an acceptable quality of life, with people at the center of all our development policies, strategies, and initiatives. CARICOM is a community of sovereign states which have agreed to act in concert in areas agreed within the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas. Unlike, for example, the European Union, which has a supranational personality, where regulations and laws made at the level of the Union have direct national effect, in CARICOM, decisions taken by the heads, although they create rights for persons within the CARICOM sphere, also create obligations for member states to implement the decisions through national laws and policies. This has complicated and lengthened our decision-making and implementation process, but notwithstanding, we have made significant accomplishments. The 4 pillars of CARICOM, economic integration, human and social development, foreign policy coordination, and security cooperation, provide a broad scope to develop an integration movement that is the longest lasting of its kind in the developing world. This is a reality that has resulted in our friends from Africa and the Pacific sending missions to study what we have been doing. CARICOM has been a model for other similar integration movements. And what have we been doing? In the past 50 years, we have functioned as a collaborative mechanism which has established a number of specialized regional institutions, some of which we heard earlier, including in the areas of education, health, agriculture, disaster management, climate change, and crime and security, which all work to enhance the benefits of our integration. We need to remind ourselves from time to time that as a region, we were successful in the establishment of the Caribbean Development Bank, the Caribbean Court of Justice, the Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Agency, the Caribbean Catastrophic Risk Insurance Facility, the Caribbean Examinations Council, the Pan-Caribbean Partnership Against HIV and AIDS, and the Caribbean Public Health Agency, among others. The objective of the CARICOM Single Market and Economy, the CSME, is to progressively and ultimately create a single, seamless economic space within our community that provides a larger scale economic, trading, and business environment. It is our platform for economic growth and development within our region, as well as our foundation for international competitiveness and effective insertion into the global economy. We already have a community agricultural policy and a double taxation agreement, and are in the process of creating a community industrial policy among member states. We have harmonized standards, sanitary and phytosanitary measures, and a competition policy. We have in place a CARICOM multilateral air services agreement. The revised treaty created a rules-based community. The treaty, the binding decisions of the Conference of Heads of Government and the Ministerial Councils, the rulings of the CCJ, together constitute an emerging body of community law. A security architecture has been put in place, including a CARICOM arrest warrant treaty, an agreement on the recovery and sharing of assets derived from criminal activity, and a counter-terrorism strategy. We have leveraged our votes in the international arena, along with sustained advocacy, to become a respected voice in global affairs, most recently in climate change and non-communicable diseases. Our slogan for this anniversary celebration is most apt: 50 years strong, a solid foundation to build on. Let us be clear, there is more that could have been done to take us further along the road. The lag in the implementation of an efficient transportation system has adversely affected intra-regional trade and the ease of travel for people throughout the community. The non-tariff barriers that impeded the flow of trade have created unnecessary friction. Actions by officials at points of entry threaten to become a deterrent to CARICOM citizens wishing to visit or seek employment in another member state, as is their right under the revised treaty. The joy of the single domestic space when our region hosted Cricket World Cup in 2007 is now a distant memory. None of these challenges are insurmountable, as intractable as they may seem, and the goal is to surmount them as we move on to the next 50 years and beyond. The regional and global environment has changed considerably since the signing of the original Treaty of Chaguaramas in 1973, and even since the revised Treaty of 2001. However, the fundamental objectives and principles of regional integration remain more valid as ever. It is these objectives and principles that are underpinning the efforts of our community as we rise to the challenges of this new era. Adapting the CARICOM integration framework to address the changing national, regional, and global imperatives requires flexibility of action, receptivity to change, and clarity of purpose and vision. Recent initiatives indicate that there is awareness of the need to design and/or redesign regional initiatives as prevailing circumstances change. One of the most consequential of those initiatives upends a traditional practice. Heads of government agreed at their March 2022 meeting to adopt a protocol on enhanced cooperation, which allows a subgroup of member states that are ready to implement a decision to do so, with the other countries following when they are able. This replaces the former process, which required all member states to agree to move forward before any could. This is a significant change, a significant marker on the path of reforms in the way the community conducts its affairs. Further, at their July 2022 meeting, heads of government acknowledged that 2 meetings a year were insufficient for them to drive the integration process at the requisite pace to meet the demands of today's dynamic world. This was apparent from the increasing number of ad hoc special meetings that were being convened. Heads have agreed now to supplement the 2 in-person sessions that are normally held in February and July with 4 virtual meetings, which will be convened on an agreed schedule well ahead of time. The schedule being agreed well ahead of time. Nothing in these arrangements, of course, precludes heads of government from meeting in emergency sessions on crises which may arise when a hurricane passes or there are issues which require them to meet on an emergency basis. This structured calendar will allow for shorter, more focused agendas, leading to more in-depth discussion and closer monitoring of implementation. This reorganization requires that ministerial councils arrange their meetings and agendas to facilitate input into the consideration of the heads of government, both to provide the information necessary for decision-making and to ensure that action is taken on the decisions taken by the heads. The Community Council, which is the second highest organ of the community, will play a pivotal role, central to information flows and monitoring of implementation between the heads of government and the other ministerial councils. In keeping with this thrust to organize the community to meet today's demands, the Intergovernmental Task Force on Treaty Revision will be reestablished in due course to review and update the revised treaty, commensurate with the requirements of the new order, and to incorporate any other decisions that have been taken since 2001 that have the effect of changing the treaty. The decisions taken so far and the strengthening of governance arrangements, which is a work in progress, indicate that the heads of government are seized of the moment and are organizing to overcome the challenges we confront. In this new dispensation, we will be seeking to establish regional expert groups from time to time to provide structured technical advice to the community in the development of policy as well as in implementation efforts. The involvement of our universities, research bodies, experts resident in the region and in the diaspora broadens the ideas base and invites a range of perspectives that could only benefit the final outcome. As a former Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, the late A.N.R. Robinson, said at Granance in 1989, "Let all ideas contend." Streamlining the governance arrangements and harnessing our intellectual capacity will provide guidance for the actions necessary to propel us forward as we continue to address the social and economic fallout from the COVID pandemic, the devastating effects of climate change, and the impact of the ongoing war in Ukraine. As a community, we have determined to take action to ensure our food and nutrition security and energy security, engage in the battle for innovative funding mechanisms, and enhance our information and communications technology infrastructure. The lessons learned from the pandemic and reinforced by the Ukraine conflict accelerated our food and nutrition agenda, which had agreed in 2018 a regional target to reduce our food import bill by 25% by 2025. We are therefore in the process of implementing an agri-food system strategy to reduce reliance on extra-regional imports of food, enhance production and trade of regional agricultural products, and provide greater access to a supply of nutritious foods. This effort is being led by the President of Guyana, His Excellency, Dr. Mohamed Irfan Ali, who has responsibility for agriculture in the CARICOM quasi-cabinet. Agri-food investment will not only enhance food and nutrition security, but also serves as an engine for broader economic growth, prosperity, and stability of the region on a sustainable basis. The goal is to increase productivity, spur regional trade and investment in the agricultural sector, encourage the involvement of women and youth, while adopting smart agriculture technologies to increase sustainable production in response to risks associated with climate change. These measures have already begun with an increase in the production of key products and the implementation of relevant policies, including for food safety and health. Equally important, we are seeking to address as a matter of priority the provision of reliable transportation. This is the piece of the integration puzzle that has eluded us for many years, but without which the 25 by 2025 ideal becomes extremely difficult to achieve. This has long been understood. It has long been understood that one of the fundamental drivers of integration is efficient, low-cost transportation of both people and goods. This will require substantial investment, and our community has been working on several fronts to achieve that goal, whether through public-private partnerships or international cooperation mechanisms. Turning to climate change, for us in the Caribbean, climate change is not some esoteric academic theory. We experience the increased ferocity of the hurricanes, the rising sea levels that are already threatening our islands and coastlines, and drought and salination of freshwater sources. The impact of climate change is visible in agriculture production and productivity loss, increased costs of replacing housing, public infrastructure such as roads, bridges, and buildings, and increasing building standards to withstand the ravages of nature. Between 2008 and 2017, according to the United Nations Offices for Disaster Risk Reduction, loss to the Caribbean and the Americas region accounted for 53% of reported economic global losses, with the heaviest cost relative to size of economies falling on the Caribbean. We, by ourselves, can do nothing about the course of nature, but we are taking action to adapt to the new normal and mitigate its consequences. The Bridgetown Initiative, initiated by the Prime Minister of Barbados, the Honorable Mia Motley, seeks to galvanize political leadership and will behind an ambitious but feasible set of policy reforms to address multiple crises, including the climate crisis. One of the proposals is to establish a new multilateral instrument for climate finance through a new allocation of 650 billion special drawing rights from the International Monetary Fund allocations to feed the new multilateral instrument. The initiative is a three-step plan to mobilize short-term liquidity for crisis response and long-term funding for sustainable development and has drawn international support. This comes in the wake of CARICOM's critical role in the Paris Agreement and in the agreement last November at COP27 to establish a loss and damage fund to help address extreme climate impacts in climate vulnerable countries. The community has 2 representatives on the committee to operationalize this fund. Building a robust renewable energy sector is at the forefront of our efforts to adapt to and mitigate the effects of climate change and to enhance our energy security. CARICOM's energy policy, including the Sustainable Energy Roadmap and Strategy, envisions 47% electricity generation from renewables by 2027. We are moving to exploit our considerable array of renewable energy sources with the assistance of the Caribbean Center for Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency and our international development partners. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished participants, one positive side effect of the enforced isolation during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic is the acceleration towards a digital economy, prompted by remote working and schooling and other activities, including cultural events utilizing information technology platforms. However, some gaps in access, including an internal digital divide, were exposed, highlighting the urgent need for more investment in technological infrastructure. CARICOM governments are at very different stages in their journey of digital transformation, with the majority still in the early development stages. A regional digital development strategy, which includes the creation of a single information, communication, and technology space to encompass the entire community, is being rolled out. The objective of the single ICT space is to establish modern, regional, regulatory, and open telecommunications infrastructures with networks using converged technologies to provide affordable and universal access. This would positively affect such issues as roaming rates, enable a single area code, as well as address copyright, spectrum, broadband matters, affordability, access, and security, including data privacy and protection. Last year saw the signing of the Declaration of St. George's, which is the first phase of the CARICOM roaming rate reduction project, a key component of the single ICT space. This project, in collaboration with the 2 major telecoms providers in the region, moves to reduce intra-CARICOM roaming charges and facilitate the provision of seamless mobile services, including voice, SMS, text, and data across the boundaries of the community for the benefit of their CARICOM customers. This new telecommunications environment requires a regional regulatory framework, and negotiations in that regard are ongoing. Regardless of the tools developed and the technology that emerges, it is the ability of our human resources not only to master the operation, but also to use it to create value that will benefit our region. This is the entree for our young people to channel their greater facility with the technology, their creativity, and innovative skills. In that regard, CARICOM's Human Resource Development Strategy 2030 targets the use of technology within the learning environment as one of the skills required to function effectively in this new era. More than 60% of the population of the Caribbean community are under the age of 30 years. Earlier generations laid a solid foundation. It is now the turn of another generation, not only to secure and improve on those gains, but to use the creativity, ingenuity, and dynamism that are the signature characteristics of Caribbean people to reimagine the next 50 years of CARICOM and square the circle of integration. In my inaugural address, when I accepted the post of Secretary General, I stated, as we build on the work of those who came before, space has to be created for new thinking, not only to solve the problems of the present, but to outline new paths for the future of our integration process. Much has been achieved in the past 50 years. A lot of it is taken for granted today. Some of the regional achievements I mentioned earlier are not even directly associated with the integration movement. The stories of regional success must be continuously shared across our community to serve as a constant reminder of what we can achieve with unity of purpose as we rise to the challenge of the new era. I thank you very much.
Dr. Barnett, this was very comprehensive and provides a solid background for the presentations and discussions to follow. We note your articulation of the changing global environment and how CARICOM is adjusting and adapting to evolving dynamics. It was also very important to be updated on the many initiatives and developments being undertaken by the community. Your address is very useful and informative to the diverse audience at this morning's event. We have students, academics, policy practitioners, etc. Everybody benefited from this extremely useful address that you presented. Thank you very much. And now we have come to the end of the opening ceremony. But before we end, I would like to express our sincere thanks to the many who made this event possible. To the CARICOM Secretariat for the opportunity to collaborate and celebrate this milestone with you and the region. Our deepest thanks. Our deepest appreciation to Senator the Honorable Dr. Emery Brown for his presence and participation. Dean Lewis Cameron,
Colleagues, just give us a minute. We lost connectivity.
we have come to the end of the opening ceremony. But before we end, I would like to express our sincere thanks to the many who made this event possible. To the CARICOM Secretariat for the opportunity to collaborate and celebrate this milestone with you and the region. Deepest thanks. Our deepest appreciation to Senator the Honorable Dr. Emery Brown for his presence and participation. Dean Lewis Cameron, we are grateful for the warm welcome you brought from the St. Augustine campus and the substantive insights you provided in your address. Sincerest gratitude to you, Dr. LaGuardia, for your leadership, commitment, and hard work on this event. Thank you to the two chairs, Professor Byron and Dr. Kayan Skid, for agreeing to moderate the two panels today. I'm indebted to you and to each one of you panelists for the perspectives you will bring to this discussion. Professor Wendy Grenade, Dr. Terrian Gilbert Roberts, His Excellency Ivan Ogando, Dr. Anthony Gonzalez, Professor Patsy Lewis, and Mr. Richard Jones. I'm grateful to our Secretariat, IT and ancillary staff, as well as marketing and communication for your hard work towards making this event a reality. We now turn to the panel discussions. Today, we have two panels. The first, CARICOM's experiences, achievements, and lessons, and the second, looking ahead, prospects, and the way forward. I now turn you over to Professor Jessica Byron, who will moderate the first session. And hi, Professor Byron, good to see you again. I don't know if you heard that before. Best wishes to everyone for a very productive and fruitful discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Montoot. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues and friends, good morning. In the interest of time, please allow me to follow the protocols already established. I'm Jessica Byron Reed, as the director, the acting director has told you, interim director, former IIR director, and I have the honor to chair this first panel on CARICOM's experiences and to introduce a very interesting and distinguished panel. Each of the three panelists will speak for 15 minutes. So our first speaker will be Professor Wendy Grenade. She has, of course, researched and written quite a lot on regional integration and on CARICOM itself. She is professor in the School of Humanities and Social Sciences at St. George's University, Grenada. Professor Grenade will be followed by Dr. Terry Ann Gilbert Rogers, Research Manager on Youth and Sustainable Development at the Commonwealth Secretariat in London. Dr. Gilbert Rogers has herself published extensively on CARICOM. And finally, we have His Excellency Ivan Ogando, Ambassador of the Dominican Republic to the Kingdom of Belgium and the head of mission to the European Union, who is based in Brussels. And Ambassador Ogando has not only research experience, but considerable practical experience of working with CARICOM, with CARIForum, and has always been a very ardent supporter of regional integration. So without any further ado, welcome to our panelists, and I give the floor to Professor Wendy Grenade.
Good morning, and thank you, Professor Byron Reed. I'm quite happy to be here. Greetings from Grenada. I really wish to thank the organizers for inviting me to participate in this most important conversation as we critically reflect on and celebrate 50 years since the establishment of the Caribbean community. First, I must pay tribute to the founding leaders and early pioneers who labored in the vineyard of regionalism. We stand on their shoulders and we honor their memory. I also thank colleagues, many of whom are here now, who have continued to try to make sense of Caribbean integration in this era. Importantly, congratulations to the people of the Caribbean, in whose name and at whose service we work to advance our Caribbean community. We must establish that Caribbean integration did not begin when the Treaty of Chaguaramas was signed in 1973. The region has had a long history with integration, going back as far as the indigenous peoples. However, my focus is the last 50 years since the establishment of CARICOM. Now, there is a lot to celebrate, and celebrate we must. One of the shortcomings of CARICOM is that we do not sufficiently celebrate achievements along the way. But it is important to do so, for as we celebrate, we discover and rediscover our collective selves. It is as we celebrate, we recognize the extent to which we have come from a tradition of overcoming. Moments of celebration stifle self-doubt and inspire us to keep growing forward. But every milestone also points to missteps, unfinished business, and non-achievements. So let's celebrate as we must, but in a sober and reflective manner. In the time that I have, I will first focus on some achievements, and you've heard a lot of them from former speakers. and I would then discuss some lessons at the end. Now, in the 50 years since CARICOM's establishment, what have we done well? What are some of the main achievements? I join others who argue that we have given several gifts to ourselves. First, a major accomplishment is CARICOM's ability to survive, its survivability. Despite enormous challenges, CARICOM has demonstrated a capacity to survive despite long pauses, staggered steps, and near derailment. It has developed the art of navigating crises and continuity. For example, at inception, when the Treaty of Chaguaramas was signed on 4 July 1973, the Caribbean stood at the intersection of the mess of federation, growing nationalism, and a hostile international environment. The Cold War was raging. Britain had joined the EC on 1 January 1973, and this created uncertainty among Commonwealth Caribbean countries. Importantly, the 1973 energy crisis and oil shock devastated Caribbean economies. In fact, from 1976 to 82, CARICOM heads of government did not meet, given economic and political turmoil. At the 9th annual meeting of the Board of Governors of the Caribbean Development Bank in April 1979, Dr. Curly King, then Secretary General of CARICOM, reflected on the newly established community in this way, and I quote, "The ink was hardly dry on the signatures of the treaty when the full force of the international economic crisis struck the bottom out of everything we had hoped to accomplish," end of quote. In a similar vein, the 1981 World Bank report stated, "The past decade has been a difficult one for the nations of the Caribbean. Many are newly independent and most are small islands with fragile economies. The problems of adjustment to being independent states in a world economy would have been immense, even if the world economy of the 70s had been as stable as that of the 60s. However, events since 1973, uncertain prices for the few primary products that they export, declines in earnings from tourism, dwindling foreign investment, higher energy costs, global recession, and hurricane-caused destruction have served to exacerbate the situation." Now, that was the report from the 1970s. Sounds as if it were today. I am of the view that the conditions were right for CARICOM to be stillborn, starved of energy at birth, yet it endured. Here we are, 50 years after, reflecting on, celebrating, critiquing, and most importantly, drawing lessons to guide the way forward. The survival instinct of Caribbean people, our cultural and spiritual resilience, and innate capacity to bounce back characterize our Caribbean community. Our survivability is a gift we have given to ourselves that we must never ever take for granted. Second, another major achievement of CARICOM has been the creation of a network of institutions and associate institutions, some of which predated 1973. Let's just imagine for one moment the Caribbean without our common institutions. And the minister spoke about some of them earlier. The Caribbean Development Bank, CAFA, CDEMA, CARICOM Impact, CHC, the University of the West Indies, and several others. Gifts we have given to ourselves to advance our Caribbean development in several functional areas. In fact, the record shows that functional cooperation is the most successful pillar of CARICOM. It is a model of regionalism among developing states that we must continue to document and showcase to the world. Now, we cannot deny that the establishment of the Caribbean Court of Justice is a major accomplishment, particularly in its original jurisdiction. a body of community law is emerging, which is building Caribbean jurisprudence. We know we have some unfinished business in the appellate jurisdiction, but nonetheless, the CCJ is a gift that we have given to our Caribbean selves. Additionally, through its 50-year journey, despite the relative small size of member states, at various historical periods, CARICOM countries have stood tall in smallness. In several instances, they have used their numeric advantage and collective exercise of sovereignty to advance their individual and collective interests in the international community. In particular, in the 1970s, as Brave Boy Wagner argues, Caribbean countries engaged in activist foreign policy. The bold step in 1972 to establish diplomatic relations with Cuba is a case in point. Now, through the years, CARICOM member states, collectively and individually, have forged strategic partnerships and alliances to increase their bargaining power, enhance their voice and reach in the international system, build solidarity, facilitate access to markets, and promote a sense of collective identity for the Caribbean in the world. As Sir Sridhar Ramphal often reminds us, Caribbean countries have championed issues that are critical to small states, particularly in the United Nations and in the Commonwealth. Since its establishment in 1973, member states have been able to coordinate their foreign policies in some respects and gain successes on several fronts. For example, the negotiations for the Lomé Conventions and the United Nations Conference on the Law of the Sea. CARICOM countries also successfully assisted with territorial disputes in the region. Now, since I was asked to focus on achievements, I will not discuss CARICOM member states' behavior within recent years, particularly in the OAS, with respect to Haiti, Venezuela, and other contentious issues. That aside, an objective assessment of CARICOM reveals a mixed scorecard in the area of foreign policy. But what we are seeing today is a rekindling of an activist foreign policy on questions of reparations, climate change, global health, de-risking, reform of global governance institutions, among other issues. The Miyamoto effect demonstrates that competent, bold political leadership is a gift we must continue to give to ourselves. We often engage in self-doubt when we reflect on economic integration in the Caribbean. As I have argued elsewhere, economic integration is generally problematic for every regional scheme. It requires sacrifice, since costs are incurred in the short term, while expected benefits are accrued over a longer period. Regionalism also simultaneously generates poles of growth and poles of stagnation, creating winners and losers. In the case of CARICOM, where member states have predominantly small open economies, the very factors that provide incentives for integration are the same factors that undermine economic integration: small size and diseconomies of scale, competitor economies, monocrop economies. Nonetheless, in the 21st century, we cannot always use small size as an excuse for the non-accomplishment of the single economy. The orange economy, for instance, cannot be bounded by territorial space or size. Our creative imagination is boundless. However, while economic integration remains a challenge, and while market-led regionalism runs counter to development, the creation of the Caribbean single market is a major accomplishment. The Oinouta wave of integration was a critical juncture. By treaty, St. John, Grenada, St. John, Antigua and Barbuda, and St. John, Barbados is one single legal space where the people of the Caribbean can continue to move, trade, live, and work. Now, because I was asked to focus on achievements, I will not speak about insularity or issues of race and class and gender and the vexing question of Caribbean transport that disrupt the quest for freedom in the Caribbean. As we move beyond 50, there is need to disrupt the disruptions that seek to reclaim the gifts we have given to ourselves I'm being told that I only have 3 minutes, so let me just finish. In addition to functional cooperation, foreign policy coordination, and economic integration, security cooperation is the fourth pillar of CARICOM. And I think we would agree that the Caribbean is a regional security complex, and a lot is happening in the security realm. Now, let me turn quickly to the lessons. As we critically reflect on CARICOM's journey, there are some lessons we can glean to inform the way forward. First, external forces would constantly disrupt the best of intentions to integrate. Creative regionalism is the ability of a regional grouping to withstand the certainty of uncertainty and the capacity to rise above the constancy of the unknown. This requires skillfully combining resistance and adaptation to a hostile world. The second lesson, institutions matter. The case of CARICOM demonstrates that small developing states can sustain integration through a network of institutions, which would become the catalyst to sustain regionalism. Third, to what end do we seek to regionalize? Market-led integration runs counter to development outcomes. By narrowly focusing on markets, economic theories often overlook institutional arrangements, political culture, and issues of identity, citizenship, and cultural norms that govern regional integration spaces. Going forward, there needs to be greater focus on developmental and security regionalism, so the process and ends can be more meaningful to Caribbean people. Fourth, integrative integration is critical to sustain the gains of regionalism. There needs to be better integration of the various pillars of integration. For example, the RSS and impacts. Now, whose regionalism? I'm arguing that people-centered integration is an imperative for the way forward. Social movements and grassroots organizations are critical support systems for the lifeblood of CARICOM. There is need to demystify regionalism to make it more inclusive. After 50 years, the conditions should be right for Caribbean people to own and claim CARICOM. 6, we need to democratize regionalism. The paradoxical community of independent sovereign states undermines the pace and quality of integration. I have often argued that despite the accomplishments, what has emerged is a 4 Ps framework. CARICOM is prime ministerial, piecemeal, paper-based, and often people-less. There are several democratic deficits: a communication deficit, a participation deficit, and an implementation deficit. 7, regional integration involves hard work, and it takes time. There is need to celebrate successes along the way, learn from missteps, and engage in continuous renewal. Finally, leadership matters. Moments of pause reflected narrow nationalism and weak regional leadership. We are here celebrating 50 years because there were pivotal moments when we had strong, visionary, bold leadership in the Caribbean. So in conclusion, regional integration is as necessary as it is problematic, and there is no ideal model or universal prescription that can be applied to all regional processes. Additionally, the confluence of external and internal forces shape the contours of the Caribbean. As such, the story of CARICOM provides a complex tapestry that reflects the paradoxical soul of the Caribbean: unity in diversity, triumph and adversity, resistance and adaptation, endurance and stagnation, resilience and vulnerability. At various historical moments, different tendencies have been dominant. So CARICOM has evolved into a push-pull model with moments of renewal and stagnation, reflecting the problematic of integration. So finally, regional integration is not an end in itself. It has to be assessed in terms of its contribution to the overall well-being of the people of the region. And I'm being told that I've ended. So we have to move beyond survivability to sustainability and more meaningful integration as we move towards the next 50 years. And I thank you. Sorry for going over by 1 minute.
Thank you very much, Wendy, Professor Grenade. Good stuff. I liked very much those important lessons. And now I'd like to invite Dr. Terry Ann Gilbert Roberts to the floor. We look forward to your views, Terry.
Thank you so much, Jessica, and Honorable Minister, Secretary General, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues all. It's a privilege to join this discussion on CARICOM's experiences over the last half century, even though I do have mixed sentiments about the fact that there have been achievements that have gone exceedingly well, but there are still so many goals that still elude us as a region. And that ambivalence manifests itself not only in my broad reflections on the geopolitical significance of the intergovernmental project, but also in relation to its social influence, not least of all in respect of its influence on me. Having regard to CARICOM's macro level geopolitical and economic significance, on the one hand, I'm cognizant of the symbolic import of this golden jubilee. It reflects, as Professor Grenade has said, the success of longevity, CARICOM being the oldest integration movement among developing countries, despite the predictions of very loud critics that the project would have failed decades ago. On the other hand, I'm also mindful of the long-standing frustration that remains among stakeholders, particularly at the national levels, about missed opportunities to realize the earliest goals of economic integration and a certain sense of inertia which threatens the sustainability of institutional development. From a social and personal perspective, I have strong nostalgic sentiments about the positive influence of CARICOM's functional institutions on my longstanding professional and personal commitment to regionalism. This year is also a special anniversary for me. It marks 20 years since the completion of my service as a CARICOM Youth Ambassador. Those 2 years of service contributed significantly to the trajectory of my ensuing academic scholarship on regional governance, my professional pursuit of regional development in the Caribbean and beyond, my exposure to and alignment with social movements towards Caribbean unity, and my broad philosophical orientation towards the concept of regional solidarity. At the same time, there is a measure of equivocation as I recognize that my service as a youth ambassador was a unique privilege afforded only to a few. I remain concerned, like others, therefore, about the democratic and implementation deficits in CARICOM institutions, which hinder the movement's influence on the everyday lives of many Caribbean citizens, particularly young people today who may not share my sense of regionalist commitment. Indeed, we could ask, what does our slogan, "I am CARICOM," mean to the average citizen? In fact, some experiences are characterized more so by frustration, by ignorance, or by indifference, rather than by reverence for the experiences over the last 50 years. Notwithstanding, in this special year, which is also recognized as the Commonwealth Year of Youth, I'd like to highlight the evolution of a few regional governance mechanisms, which I think have contributed positively to the inclusion and empowerment of young people who represent 6 out of every 10 Caribbean citizens. From my perspective, the effectiveness of regional governance should be measured by the extent to which, 1, institutions promote a common identity among people while respecting their diversity. 2, institutions connect people one to another frequently and in meaningful ways. And 3, institutions facilitate people meeting their development aspirations. As I reflect on the last half century, I believe that CARICOM has made some strides in those 3 areas through the progressive establishment and reform of institutional arrangements that have increased the social relevance of CARICOM by including young people in governance, particularly over the last 30 of the 50 years. Allow me to explore briefly those 3 areas in turn, noting the progress made as well as the lessons which must be acknowledged as we look towards CARICOM's future. And perhaps if 50 years is too long for us, looking forward to the Diamond Jubilee in the next 10 years. The first area of achievement relates to the gradual expansion of institutions which ascribe roles in integration not only to member states, but to other actors as well, thereby encouraging the formation of a shared regional identity. There have been several and mentioned already this morning, but I mentioned 2 or 3 here, which I think have helped to deepen the sense of Caribbean identity among young people. Certainly, the CXC, established in 1972, has contributed to an integrative influence on the ideas and behaviors of some citizens. Notwithstanding the ongoing challenges related to access and quality in our formal education systems, children in secondary school today have better opportunities to explore and develop their sense of Caribbeanness as a result of the CXC curricula. And to that, we could also add the experience of tertiary students through the University of the West Indies. I also want to mention the establishment of the CARICOM Youth Ambassadors Program in 1993 and later relaunched in 2001. That has socialized a cohort of young leaders into embracing a sense of Caribbeanness through leadership training and orientation to the ideals of integration. In turn, they have educated their peers about regional priorities, including the ongoing objective of achieving a fully functioning CARICOM single market and economy. It's interesting to note that even though disappointingly, the CSME still remains an incomplete part of the movement's original objectives, the vast majority of current and former youth ambassadors maintain their permanent residence within the region, suggesting that they still have that level of commitment to regional citizenship. This is a commendable testament to the program's capacity to instill a sense of commitment to region and the values of regional citizenship. The lesson, however, from the decades of progressive citizenization of regionalism through mechanisms like the CXC, U.W.I, and Youth Ambassadors Program is that this type of socialization must go deeper and wider beyond the classroom and outside of the elite leaders forum to encourage lifelong cultivation of regional identity among the citizenry. There is incomplete work in relation to the popularization of other institutions, such as the embedding of the CCJ as a final court of appeal, and the full implementation of the CARICOM Youth Development Action Plan's goal on promoting regional culture, identity, and citizenship. In respect of the latter, the Secretariat needs more technical and human resources to support member states on youth development issues. The existing program, coyly but aptly referred to as a youth desk, certainly needs expansion to broaden the reach of regional identity promotion. The second area of achievement I want to mention is the gradual expansion of civic spaces which connect Caribbean people, particularly young people, to each other and to their political leaders to discuss matters of integration. Over time, CARICOM has increased its recognition of young people's rights to participate and play a role in governance. Particularly since 2001, youth ambassadors have been consistently afforded opportunities to connect with senior officials and members of the political directorate and to connect with each other through a variety of youth conferences organized to support their capacity building and empowerment. I certainly greatly value the opportunity I had as a youth ambassador to be in the room, at least for some sessions, at Rose Hall, Montego Bay in 2003, as CARICOM heads of government grappled with the critical question of whether to deepen integration through the establishment of supranational institutions. That sense of being a part of the consideration of the future of the movement had a significant impact on me. Despite the intermittent hiatuses experienced by broader civil society groups since the 1990s in their exchanges with leaders, young people have conversely, particularly in recent years, continued to have regular representation through the Youth Ambassadors Program in meetings with successive secretaries general, heads and ministers of government and other officials, including very early on through innovative social media and online discussions. And I'm pleased to note that since last year, a youth representative is included in the annual exchange of views amongst heads with the private sector, labor, and civil society. And more significantly, heads have also agreed to support an annual CARICOM Youth Forum as a mechanism for young people to share their views with leaders. And that is a worthy achievement. The lesson here, however, is that still only a minority of youth voices are represented through the existing mechanisms. To make the most of the expanded civic space for youth, Connection among young people and between them and their leaders must move outside the halls of the formal decision-making processes at the regional level. When young people can move freely and frequently across the region to engage in cross-border civic action at the national level, then the ideas of integration expressed in regional dialogues can be activated fully. Perhaps it is time to agree to incentivize and subsidize youth travel around the region, perhaps through exchanges and civic service projects, so that young people can continue to explore and build a deeper understanding of commitment to each other. The third and final area I'd like to speak about is the progressive documentation by the Secretariat of people's visions and shared development aspirations for the region. The formulation of the community's first strategic plan in 2015, and of course subsequent updates, using a process of popular consultation is an important and positive development in the history of the movement. Rather than relying solely on the statements from heads of government, the Secretariat and other institutions are now guided by Caribbean people's documented aspirations for a unified community that is inclusive, resilient, competitive, sharing in economic, social, and cultural prosperity. One may ask, though, what should that prosperity look like? And I think some of the earliest documented visions of prosperity actually came from young people, first in a 1998 statement, and then again in the 2010 Youth Vision of the Ideal Community, which I think has also undergone some updating. But those were derived from broad consultations with young people from all walks of life, conducted by another innovative institution, the Independent CARICOM Commission on Youth Development. Though those are a little dated, the language used in those visions suggests that Caribbean people and young people want an integration process that reflects ideas of unity in diversity, solidarity with the most vulnerable, justice, fairness, respect for rights, and evidence-based decision-making. The fact that these visions have been documented and are available to inform decision-making is a positive achievement and first step to meeting those aspirations. The lesson from the direction in which young people have been pointing us is that there's need to engage more frequently in a new kind of region-wide civic dialogue, bringing young people and more mature and experienced people together to co-create new visions about regionalism and what it means to be Caribbean today, what it means to pursue regional solidarity, intergenerational equity and justice, and what the implications are for the kind of institutions required to support coordinated action with governments, civil society, the private sector on issues which matter to the creation of a just and inclusive Caribbean. So to conclude, from my perspective, CARICOM's experiences over the last 50 years reinforce my belief, like Professor Bernade's, that intergovernmental institutions matter. The ideas, values, norms, structures, decision-making processes, and organizational mechanisms have power to promote shared identity, encourage deep people-to-people connections, and help to identify and meet the development aspirations of people. The institutional evolution of CARICOM reflects commendable progress towards greater social influence and relevance of regionalism to our lives. The commitment to youth inclusion and empowerment is a particularly worthy achievement. The lessons reveal, however, the need to continue to expand and deepen the reach of these kinds of institutions. That kind of outreach will ensure that the Caribbean community is future-proof because it will become a collection of institutions of the people and not just of their governments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Terry-Ann Gilbert-Roberts, for giving us those extremely valuable reflections that are really oriented to any future that CARICOM will be pursuing. The role of young people and the socialization of Caribbean younger citizens is all important. Thank you very much. And I now have the pleasure to invite His Excellency Ivan Ogando, Ambassador of the Dominican Republic to Belgium and head of mission to the European Union, to give us his thoughts. Welcome, Ivan.
Thank you very much, dear Jessica. First, I would like to express my deepest appreciation to the Institute of International Relations of the University of West Indies for the kind invitation to give me the opportunity and honor of addressing this August gathering to reflect on the 50 years of history of the Caribbean community. While these first 50 years of existence have certainly been full of challenges, they have also seen many relevant achievements, as they have been said by the people that have spoke before me, in several areas such as foreign policy, functional cooperation, security collaboration, and economic integration. Thanks to this, CARICOM has earned the recognition and respect of the international community. Over the past 30 years, I have had the privilege of knowing and working alongside many men and women committed to the regional cause, and I have witnessed their determination to overcome obstacles in the process of achieving a more united and resilient region. Great friends such as Sir Edwin Carrington, Brandy Isaac, Percival Marie, the late Faye Husty, Henry Gill, and Richard Bernal, among many, many more, come to my mind. I would like to take this opportunity, however, to reflect on the history of the relationship between CARICOM and my country, the Dominican Republic. The countries that make up CARICOM and the Dominican Republic are united in the same geographical space, but at the same time separated by an insular dispersion that, to a large extent, has made this space one of the most heterogeneous worldwide in terms of its cultural, linguistic, historical, political, and economic diversity. In a general sense, this dichotomy of unity and separation has marked the relationship throughout the history. The fragmentation and diverse colonial configuration along with the modality of plantation economies made fluid communication and exchange between the different colonial territories nearly impossible. That didn't favor the development of an intra-regional trade that would foster economic links between them. To a certain extent, as the result of this colonial heritage, the history of relations between the DR and CARICOM has run the gamut between periods of intense collaboration and stages of mutual indifference and even political animosity. The responsibility for this dynamic rests on the shoulders of both parties, which still today have sectors with considerable levels of mutual misunderstanding. The first significant interaction between the Dominican Republic and the Anglo-Caribbean territories occurred towards the end of the 19th century, when the expansion of the Dominican sugar industry led to a significant immigration of workers from the British colonies of St. Kitts, Antigua, and Tortola. The vast majority of these immigrants settled around the sugar mills in the eastern part of the Dominican Republic, making a significant and invaluable contribution to the diversity and cultural richness of the country. While the Caribbean community was established in 1973, until the second half of the 1980s, the necessary conditions to foster a rapprochement between CARICOM and the Dominican Republic did not exist. Relations between the parties were largely characterized by relative indifference. It is only in 1987 that a stage of rapprochement began, motivated by the Dominican interest in gathering regional support to become part of the group of African, Caribbean, and Pacific states, the ACP group, signatories to the Lome Convention. Thanks to the Lome 4 Convention, the exchange between the Dominican Republic and CARICOM countries became more consistent, which led the government of the Dominican government to formally request its entry into CARICOM in 1991. However, it must be said that at that time, in the Dominican Republic, there was a significant ignorance on the part of the public and private sector and general public of what CARICOM integration process really involved. The country had no experience in participating in regional integration mechanism, and in reality, apart from the government, there were no other sectors pushing the agenda for joining the regional bloc. On the CARICOM side, there was also a great lack of knowledge about the Dominican reality, which was reflected in a persistent distrust and fear to the size of the Dominican economy, and what was seen as the possibility that the products of the country will dominate the intra-regional trade. Consequently, the Dominican request did not achieve the necessary support within the bloc and never received an official answer. But despite the lack of an official response to the application of membership, in the early 1990s, the Dominican Republic was invited to participate as an observer in some of the CARICOM sectoral bodies in the areas of health, agricultural, education, and others, which served to establish contacts between officials from both parties and eventually help define regional projects within the framework of what will later be the Caribbean Forum of ACP Strait, CARIFORUM. CARIFORUM was established in October 1992 as an ad hoc regional mechanism for the purpose of programming and coordinating the regional cooperation under the European Development Fund of the Lome Fourth Convention. It comprised all CARICOM members, plus Dominican Republic and Suriname and Haiti, which both at that time were not part of CARICOM. And it was agreed that the Secretary General of CARICOM will also serve as the Secretary General of CARIFORUM. This led to a new phase of relations in the Caribbean region. Despite some initial difficulties that were eventually overcome as technical meetings and political interaction between private, public, and academic representatives from all parties became more frequent, CARIFORUM became an unprecedented space that allowed building bridges of trust and knowledge between all countries. In particular, to a large extent, thanks to CARIFORUM, in February of 1997, for the first time, a Dominican president was invited to participate in a meeting of CARICOM heads of government and state. As a result, the conditions to launch the negotiation of a trade agreement between CARICOM and the DR were created, and eventually that agreement was signed in 1998. This was the first trade agreement negotiated as a bloc by CARICOM. Negotiation and implementation of regional projects under the Caribbean Regional Indicative Program with the financing of European Development Fund led to joint initiative in areas such as university education, tourism, agriculture, fishing, transportation, cultural development, communication, and disaster management, among others. Likewise, it gave rise to the first regional institution that incorporated all CARIFORUM countries, the Caribbean Export Development Agency, dedicated to the promotion of intra and extra-regional trade. 1996 to 2000 were years of great dynamism between CARICOM and the DR, including the reopening of the Dominican Embassy in Kingston and the unilateral opening of a permanent mission in Port Spain. Unfortunately, this dynamism was not maintained with the arrival of the new century due to a series of intra and extra-regional factors that came together. Not only the development of the DR-CARICOM relationship ended up stagnating, but also led to a setback in its quality and intensity in the following years. The need to negotiate with the EU as CARIFORUM, a new trade cooperation scheme replacing the existing unilateral arrangement from the Lome Convention, provided a new opportunity for intense interaction between the parties. The initial phase of the negotiation of the CARIFORUM EU Economic Association Agreement, or EPA, began in April 2004, and the Caribbean regional negotiating machinery was entrusted with coordinating on behalf of the region. The negotiation process was not easy, but the truth of the matter is that thanks to the joint negotiation, both Dominican Republic and CARICOM countries could obtain a much better trade terms in the EPA. And by 2008, the Caribbean became the first ACP region to sign an economic partnership agreement with the EU. By 2011, the relations between the Dominican Republic and CARICOM had improved. Changes in the institutional structure of CARIFORUM had been agreed upon, and bilateral trade had been steadily increasing. All this favorable environment contributed to a lively climate of collaboration and rapprochement, comparable to that of the late 1990s. In July of 2013, an official invitation was made to the Dominican president as a special guest to the 34th meeting of CARICOM heads of state and government held in Port of Spain. It was the first time in more than a decade that a Dominican president attended a CARICOM meeting, and we all expected a new golden era in this relation. But little did we know. Less than 3 months later, in September 2003, the Constitutional Court of the Dominican Republic issued its infamous ruling 168-13, which denied Dominican nationality to thousands of people born in the country to parents with an irregular migratory situation. This regrettable event, which mainly responded to a domestic political struggling, immediately sparked strong opposition from human rights groups from both inside and outside the country. CARICOM took a very critical stance on the issue that unfortunately resulted in a political distancing. Despite this, it must be noted that coordination of regional cooperation within the framework of CARIFORUM, as well as trade between the parties, were not significantly affected. Although relations with CARICOM as a bloc cooled, they have been slowly reestablished and strengthened at the bilateral level with member countries of the bloc in the ensuing years. In 2018, the DR opened an embassy in Antigua and Barbuda. Also that year, the Prime Minister of Jamaica made an official visit to the Dominican Republic, which was reciprocated in 2019. Furthermore, they need to jointly coordinate a rollover trade agreement with the UK after the Brexit, as well as the need to have a common regional approach for the negotiation of the post-Cotonou agreement, provided a new opportunity for increasing official exchange between the parties. In 2020, the new elected government in the Dominican Republic established foreign policy priorities that included a relaunch of relations with CARICOM. As a result, initiatives have been taken to open an embassy, a Dominican embassy in Georgetown, Guyana, and concurrent diplomatic representative has been appointed to Suriname, Barbados, St. Lucia, and St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Today, it is recognized that the absence of a membership to the regional bloc does not nullify the possibility and the need to have more intense and fluid relationship between CARICOM and the Dominican Republic. Experience shows that when both parties have worked on a common agenda, they have achieved mutual benefits that would not otherwise have been possible, as was the case in the IPA negotiation and also in the process of the rolling over of the CARIFORUM EU IPA conditions with the UK after the Brexit. As we have seen, the rapprochement and cooperation between both parties has been mediated to a large extent by the cooperation of the European Union through CARIFORUM, which has played a key role, becoming in many cases the main space for interaction. Throughout its 30 years of existence, CARIFORUM has achieved tangible progress and have brought the parties together. Programming and execution of regional resources from the European Development Fund has been well executed in the context of CARIFORUM, and the post-Cotonou agreement provides the possibility of working together and taking advantage of the opportunity that this scenario will provide. Nevertheless, it would be highly beneficial to develop a proper DR CARICOM joint agenda that transcends European cooperation and that properly address the issue of bilateral concern in order to coordinate initiatives aimed at a more inclusive and sustainable coverage agenda for the Caribbean. At present, we have relevant challenges on both the domestic and the international horizon, which hampers progress towards achievement the 2030 agenda for sustainable development for all our countries. Among many shared challenges for the Caribbean, we can mention the slow economic post-COVID recovery, compounded by strong inflationary pressures, little dynamism in job creation, declining investment, and growing social demands. Also, climate change and its negative effects on our economies is a paramount concern. A complex international scenario in which the Russian invasion in Ukraine has caused growing geopolitical tensions, less vigorous global economic growth, and higher energy prices. Furthermore, we have the recurring imposition of new non-tariff barriers from common trade partners, food insecurity, the reduction of non-reimbursable cooperation flows for development cooperation, just to name a few. Bilateral efforts should be convened to define and coordinate innovative ways of collaboration and develop coherent joint initiatives that allow response that could guarantee the defense of common interests more effectively than doing it in a separate way as CARICOM or the DR. Due to the nature of the countries of the region and the challenges in the fast-changing international scenario, the establishment of strategic bilateral alliances that recognize our differences and similarities in a framework of respect and collaboration, as well as the fostering of joint regional understanding and cooperation, should not only be an option to consider, but rather a necessity to guarantee the defense of common Caribbean interests in the global arena. Considering strengthening CARIFORUM as a space for consultation and coordination that goes beyond of what has been its traditional agenda might be an alternative worth considering, or even establishing a separate joint CARICOM DR Commission. I congratulate CARICOM in its first 50 years of existence and look forward to celebrating many more of its achievements in the years to come for the benefit of all the people in the region. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Ogando. And I think that has caused us to focus not just on a narrow conception of CARICOM, but the broader conception of regional integration with the Dominican Republic and with others in the Greater Caribbean. Now, we have had 3 extremely thought-provoking panelists' observations. We have very little time left. We are going to try to use the last 15 minutes to address some comments and questions. What I'm going to do is to give you 4 questions or comments, and then each panelist will have a chance to address what they think they would like to address out of those questions. The first is, yes, panelists are asked to comment on CARICOM's relationship with the European Union and with Latin America. Do you have any suggestions for the advancement of and deepening of relations with key partners in these 2 regions? That's first question. A second question concerns youth involvement in important policy issues. And one question is, can youth be involved in developing approaches to stem criminality in the Caribbean? A third question is, what do panelists suggest for CARICOM's response to the alleviation of the present situation in Haiti? And the last is there are 2 last comments, but it could be that any one of the panelists would like to address one of them. One of the members of the audience is asking if there are proactive strategies for engaging the media as an ally to CARICOM in addressing the lack of information on regional integration that is evident in many public discussions and reactions to regional situations. And the final comment, I think some of this has been addressed already, but somebody in our audience was lamenting the obstacles to the development of a Caribbean identity, which continues to be hampered by insularity and criticism and competition, and of course, by protectionist bureaucracies in different CARICOM member states. So I'm throwing those out. Each panelist can try to address 3 minutes to whatever you choose to focus on in those comments and questions. Over to you. Who would like to start? I think we should start in the same, should we start in the same order that we have followed so far? So Professor Grenade, first of all, then Dr. Terry-Ann Gilbert-Roberts, and finally Ambassador Ogando.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Byron. I would start with the first question, and thanks to the person who gave this question in terms of CARICOM relations with the EU and Latin America. And I would say briefly, whichever region of the world, or whether it's bilateral relations that CARICOM member states or CARICOM as a collective group would be engaging in, we have to ask ourselves, what are the outcomes that we seek from engagement? We have to ask ourselves, who do we engage? Why do we engage? What platform do we stand on to engage, whether multilateralism, bilateralism, or regionalism? And I think for CARICOM EU relations, we need to review CARICOM EU relations with Britain. What were some of the gains? What were some of the pitfalls? What were the lessons that we need to learn from as we seek to go forward with an EU post-Brexit? So I think it's very important to reflect on what went before and to see in a new time, what kind of engagement do we want with the EU? What outcomes do we seek? I think I would stop there. That's my 3 minutes. And for Latin America, the same. You know, we have to look at what has worked well, under what umbrella, whether CELAC or otherwise, and decide how can we engage in people-to-people connectivity much more in the linguistic, in terms of the hemisphere as a linguistic hub. How do we really capitalize on trade with Latin America? We have to first know what outcomes we seek as we engage.
Thank you very much, Wendy. Terry-Ann?
Thank you, Jessica.
Terry-Ann Gilbert-Roberts, over to you.
Are you able to hear me?
Yes, we're hearing you.
Good. I think I'll respond to the comments around insularity in the region and the role of young people in developing policy responses, and maybe pick up a little bit of the thread of the question around the role of the media. So, you know, the insularity is exactly what I've been speaking about. And, you know, in my own experience, before I was 18 years old, I had traveled widely across North America and Europe. I'd never been to one other Caribbean country outside. I'd never left Jamaica to visit somewhere else in the Caribbean. And that experience is not unusual for a lot of Caribbean young people. And I think that some of that insularity needs to be broken down by real life experience and civic action to build solidarity with the experiences of injustice, experiences of neglect that a lot of people are feeling in the Caribbean in this post-COVID recovery period. We can see things on the news and learn and understand intellectually, but until we feel, see, and touch, we often don't have that deep connection. And that's why I'd like to see more movement and the breaking down of those barriers that have been highlighted. I know the person who asked the question made an interesting proposal about a CARICOM, a region-wide carnival, for example, as something that would support regional identity, and that's good. We have CARIFESTA. We should be looking at how do we further popularize and improve and embed the role of something like CARIFESTA within the region. And then finally, I'll comment on the issue of young people's ideation and conceptualization of strategies to address peace and security in the region. They're already doing it. They're already doing it. They have been heavily involved in the crafting of the strategies, and they're heavily involved in leading on peace and security initiatives in their community. What we haven't done is properly document those initiatives and share them widely so that we can learn and exchange on good practices. So absolutely, yes, they can and they have been playing a role in that regard. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sherian, especially for that last piece of information, which I think is very valuable. Ambassador Ivan, over to you.
Well, thank you, Jessica. Well,
Ambassador Ogando.
yes, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Hello.
Hello? Hello? Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Well, I will refer to the question about CARICOM relation with the EU, basically. CARICOM has enjoyed a privileged relation with the EU since 1975. We have to remember that it was CARICOM who led the creation of the ACP group and the signing of the Georgetown Agreement, creating the ACP group back in 1975, and throughout the Lomé Convention, the Cotonou Agreement, and now the post-Cotonou Agreement that has yet to be signed, there have been a significant privileged relation between CARICOM and the EU. Of course, things have changed. Priorities in the Europe side have changed as well, and then but now we have a post-Cotonou agreement, which a different configuration from the previous agreement. In the post-Cotonou agreement, now we have regional protocols. There are, while there are a common base for all ACP states, there are 3 different protocols to address the specificities of each of the ACP regions. One protocol for the Africa, one protocol for the Pacific, and another protocol for the Caribbean. And that would be the framework of that will set the pace of the relations with the political exchange and cooperation with the EU in the forthcoming future. Not to mention the economic partnership agreement, which, it has to be said, has not been as successful in terms of catapulting the export of our region as we initially expected. But trade have growth nevertheless. But there are other things that we need to address within the institutions of the EPA in order to make the EPA a more effective mechanism for the sustainable development of the region. With regard to Haiti, of course, Haiti is a full member of CARICOM, and CARICOM have vested interest in the solution of the current Haitian crisis. There must be, I would say, a more inclusive approach. There must be more exchange of between all parties in order for the Dominican Republic, Cuba, and all the Caribbean to know what each other are doing. So it must be an inclusive approach towards solve the Haitian situation with the Haitian, of course, with the Haitian political leadership and civil society as well involved in this this process. That's what I would say. And with regard of Latin America, well, in July we will have the CELAC EU summit, and we are certainly looking to within the framework of that summit also have a particular mini summit, Caribbean and EU, in order to address the specificities of our region. Because many times within the framework of the CELAC, our region gets as they say in English, the end of the stick, So we get lost with the discussion of the big countries such as Brazil, Argentina, blah, blah, blah. So we need, and we are pushing in order to have within the margin of the CELAC summit, a mini summit between Caribbean leaders and the EU political leadership as well, in order to address our specificities and our concerns, and to foster a more dynamic relation with the EU and also with Latin America. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Ogando. I think you have made it quite clear how important it is for the Dominican Republic to be more closely linked to CARICOM in pursuing our joint foreign policy and development initiatives. I would like to extend my heartfelt thanks to all members of the panel. This has been a very rich panel. It's given us a lot of food for thought, and I hope it's given CARICOM staff and governments a lot of food for policy development, because there have been many ideas. I would like to thank the panel very much, and to end with the thought expressed in the final comments of Professor Grenade, that regional integration and CARICOM integration, they're both as necessary as they are problematic. And in the next 50 years, we have to keep laboring to realize all the aspirations of Caribbean people in our development visions and the full realization of our very rich identity, regional identity. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to be with you this morning, and all the best to you, and all the best to CARICOM. I would like to invite Dr. Kayan Skeet, who is the chair of the next panel, to take the floor. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prof. May I say something before Dr. Skeet speaks? I need to just say something you've said already, Prof, but I must say that I agree that the presentations were very high quality and analytical. So sorry for repeating it, but I needed to add that. Prof, thank you so much for your excellent chairing of this panel. For those who do not have the program, Professor Byron is the former director of the Institute of International Relations. While she was director, she was a staunch advocate for public events on various issues of importance to the region. Thank you for your quiet support and contribution to the advancement and work of the IAR, even as you have retired from the Institute. So thank you so much, Professor Byron and panelists on this first session. It was brilliant, it was excellent, and I look forward to the second panel. So over to you, Dr. Skeet. Thank you so much.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much. I'm joining you from Barbados. I am Dr. Kayan Skeet, and I am an alum of the Institute of International Relations. All protocols observed. Welcome to the panel where we look ahead, where we discuss the prospects and the way forward. And joining us today, we have three distinguished panelists. Starting the baton will be Dr. Anthony Gonzalez, economist and former director of the Institute of International Relations, followed by Professor Patsy Lewis, senior fellow of the Watson Institute for International and Public Affairs, and the director of the Center for Latin American and Caribbean Studies. And ending the baton for today's panel 2, we have the perspective from civil society. Mr. Richard Jones, officer in charge of the Caribbean Policy Development Center. Each panelist will be allocated 15 minutes to provide their contribution, and we will wrap up panel 2 with a short question and answer segment. Feel free to submit your questions via WhatsApp or via the chat feature below. Dr. Gonzalez, over to you, sir.
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Skeet. Let me, first of all, thank the Institute of International Relations for inviting me. And let me also greet my former colleagues of the Institute, whom I haven't seen for quite a while. Yes, Professor Byron, Dr. Montour, Professor Dukaran, and I should also greet Ambassador Ogando, as we work together for quite a few years in some regional institutions. As I have limited time, I want to essentially focus on some key things. And the first thing is to point out that, in my view, CARICOM did not succeed where it was originally founded. That is to say, the original purpose of CARICOM was to establish an economic base for the region. And that's when it started as a free trade area. That is, you had CARIFTA in 1969. And then it moved on to higher phases. And I want to treat with that because I think we need, in a sense, to get a glimpse of the future by looking back at the past. I think that's the only way we could understand where we're going if we look back at the past. But I want to argue as well, for instance, that today we talk about CARICOM successes largely in terms of non-economic goals. It's achievement in social goals, it's achievement in diplomacy, coordination of foreign policy, or its achievement in functional cooperation and security and so on. I shall come back to that. And I think that has largely to do with the fact that we failed in the area of economics. We failed largely in terms of economic integration and cooperation. So that is basically the kind of approach I shall take, and I shall project the future on that as I go through this particular document in front of you. Now, first of all, I felt it useful to establish some kind of ideal type of integration, what we normally work with in terms of that Belasa type ideal scheme of integration, where you have 5 basic steps. You have, for instance, the free trade area, the customs union, then you have the common market, then you have the single market, and then you have the single economy. You would see here where, for instance, each of these stages, you have certain steps that have to be taken. And what I've tried to do is establish a scoreboard and to indicate weights in each of these areas based on the difficulty of achieving them. And that criteria was established largely looking at integration schemes around the world, work done within the European Union, where you can point out where some tasks are more difficult than others, and therefore you could attribute to it a slightly different weight. And what I did is to divide the period from 1973 or even before, from 1969 to 2000 as the free trade area and customs union phase. And then the second phase, which is the CSME phase from 2001, you see I break that down into the common market, the single market, and the single economy. Now, essentially just looking at the first phase, which is the free trade area, you see basically that is the easiest phase, and you'll see where, for instance, more or less we achieved the objectives of that phase, which is internal removal of duties, the elimination of quantitative restrictions, the elimination of non-discriminatory taxes, non-discriminatory duties, and we established rules of origin. So we got off pretty well in that first phase, and then we went after the second phase, which was the customs union. And there you find that difficulties start to arise. You find that, for instance, okay, we didn't do too badly with respect to the common external tariff, although there were some areas there where you had difficulties. We didn't abolish the rules of origin, which normally in the perfect kind of customs union, you would normally abolish the rules of origin, but we kept them on, and we still have them up to today. Then in customs harmonization and cooperation, we hadn't really achieved much. There was a lot of difficulties in getting a coordinated and harmonized customs code, and there were lots of problems into whether we should use the UNCTAD approach or some other approach and so forth. We never achieved free circulation, which is usually associated with a customs union. We have been talking about it a bit today, and after we have been trying to implement the CSME, it has come back on the agenda. And then we have the sanitary and phytosanitary regime. As you know, that has been the basis for all the barriers in trade and agriculture. We had serious difficulties there. We have tried to establish something now. We have an institution now that looks after it. And we have tried to ensure that all countries come up to at least the WTO level on that. So essentially, in that first phase, I think we probably achieved especially with respect to the customs union, we probably achieved about half or 60% of that phase. Now, moving on to the other phases, you would see where, and if you could just move up the, what's on the screen, if you could just bring it up, scroll it down, you see we come now to the common market phase. That second phase, we have first of all, yes, the common market. Yes, it's not on the screen I'm seeing in front of me, but you could put it up in front. And in that common market phase, you would find there where there are several things that have to be achieved and which basically were accomplished more or less in a relatively moderate way. We have the common external trade policy, and that there I would say out of a score of 10, I would give them about 5. We had the free movement of persons, and I gave them about 18 out of 30 on that. Free movement of capital, I gave them about 23 out of that. Free movement of services, I gave them about half of that. And common standards, I gave them 9 out of 10. We had other things as the freedom of CARICOM nationals to establish enterprises. We have been pushing that, and I think we probably achieved about 60% to 70% of that. Government procurement, there are always problems with that. I don't think we have moved very far from in that. Competition law and policy, there are several difficulties involved there with a number of member states, not even establishing a competition body, and it is difficult to get a common policy and a common law right throughout the region. I mean, some countries, if you take the OECS countries, they still have to establish one competition authority before they can properly negotiate a competition body within CARICOM. And the other areas like intellectual property, where you find progress has been very slow, trade remedy measures, institutional development, and I shall come back to that in a little while, coordination of monetary and exchange rate policies where we didn't really achieve very much. So coming on to the fourth step in that phase, which would be the single market, where we're trying now to establish a single market as distinct from a single economy. We have should have abolished all customs formalities. We should harmonize technical regulations. We should have greater financial services legislation, as well as an investment agreement and investment code. We should have dealt a bit more with the transportation issue. We are still trying out to deal with it, as I see in some of the more recent reports. And taxation as well should have been a bit more common, as well as environment, which was with us from the very early stage. I think we have tried to do some things there, but we haven't really accomplished much. Now, in the last phase, what I call, well, I think you see there marked that the economic union is really the single economy. In that phase, I think we hadn't really achieved. Actually, we gave up on that phase, which is to say that we used to talk about the CARICOM single market and economy. Today, we only talk about the CARICOM single market because we realize that we cannot achieve the goals of the single economy. The single economy involves one currency, monetary union, fiscal union, financial market union, greater policy coordination and harmonization of relevant laws. And this is very important. Other scholars like Professor Gerban and Professor Lewis and so forth emphasize is the question of supranational institutional development. That is to say, having one central executive, similar to the European Commission, in order to drive the process of integration and ensure greater implementation. We haven't really been done that. So in that area of the single economy, that last phase, you would find where CARICOM really did not really even attempt to make progress in those areas. So this gives me, if you see the last little table I have here, you'd see where I gave some scores. I gave a score, is trying to do a kind of performance-based metrics to kind of assess this thing. You have, for instance, a total ideal. If you were to say, what weight would you give to achieve all those things I have there, all those 5 steps and so on, you would see where the total score would be about 1,300. Then you ask, what was CARICOM's ambition? CARICOM ambition was never to achieve that 1,300, but let's say I estimated it to be about 750. And out of that 750, I think they achieved about 283, which is about 300, which is less than half of what they set out to achieve in terms of their ambition. So that's the first point I want to make in terms of what we have set out to achieve. We really didn't achieve more than 50% of this. And if you want to be generous, we could take 50%. Now, of course, economic integration, as we all know, is not necessarily, doesn't really fully represent integration. We talk about non-economic integration, and we talk about things like the coordination of foreign policy. We talk about the social integration. We talk about functional cooperation, and we talk about security cooperation. Now, essentially, in terms of these areas, we don't have metrics, and it's very difficult to discuss that. Because when we say coordination of foreign policy, we cannot say, for instance, if we have advanced or whether we have receded in terms of whether we have built better structures within CARICOM to coordinate foreign policy. So today we could say the mechanism is more advanced and that we can take decisions. We saw what recently happened there with Venezuela. We saw the whole disarray that we end up in a lot of these areas. So I'm not sure that we can meaningfully talk about advances here, because there have been serious failings over the last years. And I wouldn't even mention harmonization. That was totally not on the cards. That was totally out. With respect to functional cooperation, certainly that's an area where one can see some sort of progress. And it stems to the reason that in a region where economies are so small, that most of them lack the administrative economies of scale. So there's a natural urge towards regional cooperation in this wide variety of areas. We have roughly over 100, I have them, I didn't get a chance to really pull them up, but we have probably about 100 regional organizations in this region. And many of them are under-resourced, underfunded. They depend a lot on external support. And I'm not sure to what extent we could talk about success. There's some you can identify. For example, we could see during the pandemic that PAHO and the Caribbean equivalent and so forth was very instrumental in terms of promoting integration and very useful in terms of vaccination and stuff like that. And there are probably one or two others which you can take now. We mentioned, we talk a lot about CXC in education and the Caribbean fisheries and stuff like that and so forth. I'm not able to make a proper evaluation of that because that would be an exercise by itself. But what I would basically say is that it stands to reason that that is an area where, obviously, because of our small size, we tend to move towards building regional organization to be more successful. Finally, security cooperation. Again, here, there's no proper metric. The people who work in this area tend to refer a lot to what I think it was Professor Dr. Barnett referred to when she talked about the ICC, when we had in 2007, when we had the Olympic, the ICC cricket, and we decided to have a kind of common agreement with respect to sharing intelligence and with respect to immigration procedures and so forth. And the guys who work in the security tend to see that as a kind of model. But I don't know if that was a one-off arrangement or if that is being reproduced in the region in terms of dealing with organized crime and all the things that afflict us in this region. So I don't know what to say in terms of really security cooperation, I just say the extent to which we may have made some progress. So essentially, therefore, both in terms of economic cooperation and non-economic cooperation, we have some certain successes, but we have also two certain failures. And let me point out that with respect to economic integration, we see that our regional trade, intra-regional trade has not really improved in any meaningful way since CARIFTA or since CARICOM in 1973. And more importantly, and this has always been my position with respect to CARICOM, I've always felt that CARICOM can best serve the region insofar as it could create a unified market that would strengthen the competitiveness, the international competitiveness of the countries vis-a-vis the outside world. Because for me, more important for CARICOM is to boost extra-regional trade. And to the extent that you're failing, then if you look at the figures, you would see basically where CARICOM is CARICOM's share of world trade. And CARICOM's share to many of its traditional partners, even the European Union, that share of world trade is just declining over the years. we are losing market share to all other countries. And that's why you find that we ended up in an economic situation that is pretty glim down the road. There are one or two little things happening around the region. Guyana found some oil and so forth. But when you look beyond that, you'll see that essentially we are not gaining market share in terms of extra-regional exports. And to me, the CARICOM essentially should have dealt with that in terms of allowing the factors of production to move more freely, compete more, and target the extra-regional market. But let me also just add that I also, in terms of a kind of performance-based metric approach, looked at the compliance issue to see to what extent there's full compliance with the existing regulations and the laws and so on. This is an indication as to the extent to which you could go forward in the future. If you don't implement existing laws and regulations, then I don't see how you could talk very much about going forward in the future. I did in a piece some years ago, that was 2018, it was published. I took 15 reform commitments. Essentially, they were about customs administration, protection of intellectual property, sanitary and phytosanitary measures, movement of skilled nationals also in the area of non-university graduates, accreditation, competition law, etc., etc. I don't want to spend too much time I'm going into all of them because I don't have the time. But these 15 framework agreements are essential for CARICOM going forward. And what I found basically is that only 3 countries in CARICOM, 3 out of 15, had full compliance. So it tells you basically that these 15 arrangements here were not really considered with the kind of priority that one needed to consider them. And I was not alone in that finding. There's a similar kind of study did by Professor Govan before me, which tended to also point out that. He pointed out that there were 50% or 55% commitments in these particular areas. And this is when you go into all the details of getting your laws, enacting laws with respect to all these things that we talk about here that are necessary for the single market and economy. We don't have time to go into that. So that basically, we have not fully implemented the single market that we attempted to achieve. So that looking down the road in the future, I tend to be rather skeptical of how far we can really go. My feeling is that one could hardly expect to see achievements in the single economy, that is to say, a monetary union or a single currency, of coordination or harmonization of fiscal policy. I doubt that we will see these things in the next 20 years, probably not in the next 50 years. So I don't hold up my hopes too high in that particular area. And then you have to deal with what I call the harsh realities of the region. We have to deal with more than half of the CARICOM market. Haiti, for example, is in total disarray. Where I'm not even sure today when we talk about Haiti, whether Haiti is, where's Haiti's position with respect to the single market and economy? I tried to find out and I can't get a proper answer with respect to how they function. I cannot even see in the context in which they are, how they can easily move in terms of advancing CARICOM to some kind of higher level in the situation where we have failed miserably in terms of promoting democracy in Haiti. We don't have the capacity to really bring democracy to Haiti in any meaningful way. We depend on a lot of outside players to help us do that. So again, here, looking at that, I tend to be very skeptical as to what could be achieved in the area. Certainly in certain functional areas, and I go back to what I said earlier about the functional areas, certainly in some of those areas, one may expect that, like health, for example, given our experience with the pandemic, one could expect that there may be a little further cooperation, further integration there. I also tend to feel that security is also an area where you may get much greater cooperation and probably integration because of what is facing us in the region. We are facing organized crime that is going by leaps and bounds. And anyone looking at this situation in the region here must be concerned about, where that is headed. All countries in the region are affected, and all of them, in a way, have to try to get together to deal with it. So in that functional area, I tend to feel that we may see some greater integration. Let me conclude because I don't have much time and I don't want to take up too much of your time. But let me say that in my view, the future is also not very, very welcoming in terms of future integration. In the past, we had integration based on a globalizing world and a liberalizing world. That is to say, the world was opening up and liberalizing. And basically, that is what pushed us here in this region to integrate more and to try to move from a character to a single market. We were pushed a lot by the WTO because we were members of the WTO, and the world was pushing integration. To be part of the world movement, to be part of the Marrakesh Agreement, to be part of the WTO, you had to liberalize. And that pressure on us to liberalize is what forced us to move towards that higher level of integration. In the world in the future, I'm not seeing that. The world is moving back to a kind of protectionism, a kind of deglobalization, as some people tend to call it. And as such, I tend to feel that world is not necessarily going to favor integration in this part of the world. Some people tend to think there's going to be greater regionalization as they're decoupling between US and China and they retreat in this region. And we build regionalization may become greater, but I'm not too hopeful with respect to something like that. So I remain relatively skeptical as to how far CARICOM would go in the future. I'm very disappointed with respect to widening. I was glad to hear Ambassador Ogando talk about this because we made no progress with respect to widening in this region. As a matter of fact, it's a dismal failure, how we approach the Dominican Republic and Haiti. And I see nothing in the future which in a way allows us to really compensate for that and move forward. So we have not been able to widen CARICOM in any meaningful way. And here we are stuck here with what we have, trying to deal with Haiti, with very little external help in the offering. And we are hoping the best to go forward. What has happened basically is that we have come to accept variable geometry, where we talk about, let the willing go forward. Let the 5 or 6 who are willing to go forward, let them go forward and we build integration. I'm not sure to what extent that is very useful. It has worked like that in the past because if you look at it in practice, you would find it's basically about 5 or 6 core countries that adopt the main instruments in CARICOM to allow them to make some kind of progress. But that idea of variable geometry suggests to me that we are accepting the lowest common denominator, and we tend to feel that, well, this is realism and we can't go any further in this area. Let me stop there, and I'll be happy to take any questions that you have to offer. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gonzalez. Very interesting presentation, and I absolutely love the use of the metric. We need more evidence-based decision-making in our region, and your scorecard is fabulous. There have been several questions for your scorecard to be shared, but we can address them later in the question and answer. So thanks again. We now move on to Professor Patsy Lewis. Professor, thank you so much for your patience. Can you unmute, please? Awesome.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. It's really a pleasure for me to be here and an honor to be invited to participate in this discussion. And 50 years of surviving, I think, is a very important milestone, especially given the fraught conditions under which the post-independent Caribbean have had to operate. And of course, even more fraught for CARICOM in that context. And Professor Grenade already elaborated on some of these challenges very early in CARICOM's life. I would also like to take this opportunity to congratulate the new CARICOM Secretary General, Her Excellency Dr. Carla Barnett, as the first woman Secretary General. And I really look forward to us moving beyond references to the founding fathers. I'm not even interested in us coming up with founding members, but mothers, but we'll come to that later. I was involved 10 years ago when when CARICOM was 40 years old in a conference that was organized by the Sir Arthur Lewis Institute of Social and Economic Studies at the University of the West Indies, Mona, Jamaica. And I'm happy to see my collaborators, Drs. Terry and Gilbert Roberts and Jessica Byron here. And taking this conference as an inspiration, we published 2 books following along the themes, the major themes of CARICOM, The Widening of CARICOM, which was published in 2018 by Routledge, and last year, a publication that focuses on CARICOM's deepening agenda, which was published by the University of the West Indies Press. And I have a less pessimistic view about CARICOM's widening agenda than was just expressed, but because I think if you consider the move by the non-independent Caribbean territories to become closer to the OECS and CARICOM, I think that's a plus. And it's an area of neglect, I think, in when we think about the Caribbean, how we position the non-independent Caribbean and the extent to which we see our own integration movement as providing a broader arena for economic, political, and social operation of our fellow Caribbean people. But that's how my focus is on today. I raised the 2 publications that we have put out, not because I want you to buy those books, and of course you absolutely should, right? But because they show that people are engaged in thinking about CARICOM, that CARICOM is important. They also speak to possible trajectories for CARICOM, in particular, the relevance of some of CARICOM's market integration strategies, especially in the monetary union, fiscal conversion and harmonization, some of which, of course, have been raised by Professor Gonzalez. And the question is, how do you think about those elements of CARICOM in the experience of the European Union, which has had its own crisis, its own problems with fiscal convergence and harmonization? Of course, we see Britain leaving that arrangement. So I think that the focus on trading CARICOM has to be given some more attention, especially as we think about what's relevant and what's not going forward. The volume, especially the focus on CARICOM itself, speak to advances, CARICOM's role in advancing pro-women legislation like gender-based violence. But of course, there is far more role there for CARICOM to play in promoting equality, not just for women, but also for marginalized sections of our economy, like gay and lesbian people, like disabled people, people who are marginalized because of poverty, class, ethnicity. So I think there's a lot more that can be done, and we can elaborate on that later on. We still have, as reflected in some of the articles, problems in enacting migration policies. The core question of reparations, which has now come on CARICOM's agenda, which wasn't there before, reflects a new innovation for CARICOM. But these authors also suggest new paths for CARICOM, a greater role in addressing the urgency of climate change, the need for constitutional reform, especially in relation to election financing, and an enhanced role for regulatory mechanisms and legislations. And I I'm saying this because I think it's important to recognize my colleagues and the fact that even though they're not here, they're actually thinking about these things. But I also have my own take on regional integration that I would like to share. 50 is an arbitrary figure, but its value lies in the opportunity it provides us to rethink or to even press the restart button along different lines. So my comments will focus on CARICOM's role in the economy, central to which I think is the need to rethink the development model on which regional economies are based and which is promoted through CARICOM. And also how CARICOM can advance the political and social life of people in the region. And here I'm focusing more on democratic processes. So any reflection on CARICOM's role in the economy should take stock of where the world is currently, the clear crisis in the neoliberal model of development that Professor Gonzalez just spoke to, and that CARICOM has been pursuing, possibilities the crisis presents for rethinking its engagement within this model. In other words, crisis also presents an opportunity for us to rethink this model and all how we are located in it. In other words, we need to consider that this phase of globalization will end and to think about what the alternatives might look like. And there are lots of trends that we should consider. The likelihood that pandemics might well become endemic. We're already seeing the effects of climate change that probably would make crises and everyday occurrences. We see changes in, likely changes in production patterns, such as nearshoring in terms of industrialized countries sourcing their raw materials. We see the increased role of artificial intelligence, 3D printing, and so on, that we need to be conscious of as we think about what regional integration can look like going forward. I suggest that in rethinking CARICOM, we consider its role in the economy beyond its focus on trade. We have been following an economic model, frankly, that marginalizes people, that regulates them to the margins of the economy, manifested in, because how else would you explain high levels of poverty, high levels of unemployment, despite our high levels of debt? We also, this model also leaves key sectors of the economies under foreign controls, especially in the minerals, the extractive sector, and tourism. And new likely economic activities, such as increased oil extraction, which we're already seeing happening in Ghana, and which is likely to be followed, not just in other countries as well, but also deep seabed mining are likely to go the same way. In other words, are likely to be extracted for the benefits of others rather than for Caribbean people, even as they present existential threats to our survival. I suggest that CARICOM, even immediately, CARICOM has a regulatory role to play in providing stronger regulatory frameworks to govern these sectors. And we can come back to that. But I think it's just basic. So rather than having weak national governments, we negotiate with powerful transnational companies, that we at least think about a basic regulatory framework that countries can follow. We have to think about what we produce. It's nonsensical to focus on trade when we haven't paid a lot of attention on production. We've been getting greater and greater market access, and our ability to penetrate markets are as weak as they ever were. So production and how we produce, the possibilities for production integration are very important. We need to be clear. I mentioned resources, I mentioned oil, I mentioned the deep seabed mining for rare minerals. And a question that we have to put on the table is what resources should we exploit and what resources should we not exploit? And we can develop this later on. How can we get resources from the land and the medicine and the sea, for example, such as medicines, without doing greater damage to our environment? How can the regional space provide a better basis for any economic activities that we embark on to bring better outcomes for the region, to move us up the value chain? How do we think about a tourism industry if we decide it's still important, that does not marginalize its people? Too many of our economic policies sideline our citizens, relegating them to workers, laborers, service providers with a real wealth going to the very same countries, groups of people that have benefited from centuries of their subjugation. So I would argue that the guiding questions for the development model that we should think about, and we need to come up with a new development model, is whose economy? Who is this economy for? Whose resources, and what is the economy for? In thinking about this, we need to think about the elements of Caribbean life and livelihoods in both terms of economic and social relations that we should consider sacred, that are not up for barter or sale. CARICOM's next 50 years should be informed not by the EU, the US, China, and the privileging of trade, not the wishes of the local private sector, but by a vision for CARICOM to aspire to, starting with the question of what an ideal CARICOM would look like if it were to center the wishes and shared ambitions of ordinary citizens. I would like to say that we need to consider CARICOM survival as lineless in fulfilling the CSME and completing its trade agenda than in a project grounded in the common history of colonialism, continued economic marginalization, and the need to create a space that enhances its people's agency. And I know I'm running out of time, but I think central to this is democracy. We have inherited deeply not fit for purpose, to use an ugly expression, systems of democracy that don't take account of our size, that don't take account of how we relate to one another, that are deeply problematic, that need to be revamped across the region. And I think the same problems that you see nationally are reflected regionally. The absence of ordinary people from the center of these processes of democracy. And it's particularly, ordinary people are particularly missing from the regional project. I think that going forward, especially as we dream and have a vision of what CARICOM should look like, and I'm happy to hear that there are moves afoot in light of all of these global insecurities to rethink how CARICOM can be revised. But I think that should not happen without a massive, broad-based, grassroots process in each and every Caribbean state, asking people what their ideal Caribbean looks like, how they would like to see themselves in it, and to create a vision of development and a vision for CARICOM around that. Now, I'm saying all of this, knowing full well that CARICOM is at the mercies of regional governments. And the question then is how can CARICOM intervene to get this process started? And I'm not saying that CARICOM should replace social movements, but I think we really need to have broad-based social movements pushing for these changes, both at the national and the regional level. But I also think that CARICOM could start the kind of broad-based discussions, which I don't think went broad enough, that informed the West Indian Commission's report in thinking of how we can reconceptualize this. And when we think about CARICOM moving forward, I just want us to think about where we started as locating us in the history that we're coming from, a history of slavery, a history of the marginalization of Black people, and to think about how we have created and been complicit with economic models that continue that exploitation. Reparations is not just something we do with the external people. Reparations is also something that we have to think about practically at home. And I know I've run out of time. Thank you for your forbearance.
Professor, the organizers will actually grant you an additional 3 minutes if you wish to continue. Yes.
Oh, that's so generous. I mean, why?
No, you were very thought-provoking. And I think as we start to think about rethinking our development model as well as CARICOM, I think as we move to discussion from the economics to look at our actual developmental perspective, you actually segue nicely into civil society perspective coming from Mr. Jones. So would you like an additional 2 minutes to wrap up?
I just want to say on the civil society thing, civil society does not represent Caribbean people. And I think that we have bought in. I mean, so much of our ideas are imported, which is a discredit to all of us, right? The European Union is pushing civil society. How does civil society relate to farmers, relate to people who are not organized in organizations whose voices are not heard? We have to come up with our models that empower our people, that allow people who haven't had a chance to have more than even primary school education, who are bright people, who are intelligent people, who are people who think about their reality, right? We have to find mechanisms that allow them to inform us. We have to move away from a very elite model, a model of integration, a model of a very elitist, right? Brilliance does not reside among those of us who are formally educated. We're just lucky. We don't have anything more than somebody else who didn't have the opportunities we had. And I'm happy to see, again, the Secretary General saying that they're trying to broaden the sources of intellectual engagement with CARICOM. I think that's very important because I think that has always been narrow. And when we speak to one another, we are in the same kind of circular loops of thinking, patterns of thought. And I really think that's very good, but we need to find ways to just listen to ordinary people, you know? And just remember that this is about our emancipation and we're not there yet. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor. Mr. Jones, our final batsman for today. And I hope you do take the chance to respond to Professor.
Yes, actually, I was a little concerned that the professor was going to speak on exactly the same things that I was actually going to raise myself. I think we slightly differ, certainly in the last part of her presentation on civil society, although I do have to recognize the fact that there is some truth to what is said, because when we're talking about civil society organizations, the ability to engage with those most vulnerable is quite dependent on our capacity. And we do have some capacity issues across the sector over the last few years, over the past, let's say, decade or two. But I just wanted to say as well that CPDC has a number of projects right now with farming communities where we actually go into the communities themselves, whether that is Dominica or Jamaica or Barbados. We actually go into the communities to get their positions and views and perspectives that we can articulate. We do that with Indigenous communities as well. We do that with young people, and we do that with those who are most at risk, survivors of domestic violence. And we have many members and partners who also engage at that level. So I just wanted to say that that framework does exist, although it would not be as strong as it was well, a decade or two ago, where it would have been much easier. So point taken, but I think we would disagree slightly on that to varying degrees. I'm going to give more of a formal presentation. I'm going to reflect on much of the future for CARICOM and the role we'd like to see CARICOM playing in the context of what's going on globally. There are many views that were exposed just now that we do share the changes in the global political economy, which we need to be cognizant of and can have a broad impact on us in the future as well, and CARICOM and the need for CARICOM leadership in that respect. So if I can start by just saying good afternoon to everyone. The protocol's already established. I'll just move straight into my presentation. I want to thank, first of all, the Institute for International Relations for inviting us to make this presentation today and be part of this process. We have been engaging CARICOM now for over 25 years or so. So we do have some understanding and appreciation for CARICOM and its issues, both regionally in terms of policy issues as well as within the institutions themselves. But first, I'd like to join with the Institute of International Relations at the University of West Indies in celebrating CARICOM's Golden Jubilee. We congratulate the CARICOM Secretariat and our leaders who have remained steadfast and committed to the regional integration process, despite numerous challenges over the past 5 decades or so. And we do note that this has not been a very smooth process at times. Our region, as Dr. Gonzalez would have mentioned, does have different views and it does look fragmented. But overall, we've been able to maintain the effort of the CARICOM and the CARICOM movement. Few intergovernmental political institutions have been able to achieve such longevity and can boast of reasonable advances in regional development, cooperation, as well as synergistic policy and program coordination. I would like to recognize the role of the 10 CARICOM Secretary Generals that led the institution, particularly those with whom we would have engaged from the early 90s to the present day. These are Ambassadors Edwin Carrington, Lolita Applewhite, Irene LaRocque, and Dr. Carla Barnett. As we continue to look to the future, there must be an acknowledgement of the important roles we must all play in the short and long term to achieve sustainable development in the region. So how CARICOM and by extension our region prepares to renegotiate our place within the systemically dynamic and emerging global political economy will be critical to how we drive change in our society. CPDC is cognizant of the role CARICOM must play in tackling the myriad of challenges affecting our region. To simplify our analysis, we are looking at CARICOM in 3 different spaces. CARICOM, the political high-level decision maker, CARICOM, the Secretariat and its associated institutions, and CARICOM, the people and the region. And so far, we've heard quite a bit of discussion on the weaknesses of the CARICOM, the people and the region, and how that relationship is there, and we will address that a little later on. So addressing the political leadership role of CARICOM, we commend our past and present leaders for their contributions to regional development. Further, we'd like to recognize several of the former prime ministers, a number of whom are still remembered for their thoughts or proposals on regionalism today. In this respect, I would like to identify Anil Barrow, Eric Williams, Patrick Manning, Owen Arthur, Kenny Anthony, to name a few. CPDC is of the view that proactive political leadership within CARICOM is needed now more than ever. This is often not an easy task for individual member states when faced with many urgent and pressing matters on a daily basis in their respective countries. Non-governmental organizations believe that changing global economic and political environment foretells great uncertainty as to where our region fits within the global economy and political sphere. Many of the historical norms and modalities that have guided global and local societies and economies over the past few decades are being tested, contradicted, and many are rapidly evolving. This uncertainty is heavily characterized by a seemingly polarizing struggle between the 100-year-old Western historical rules-based, unipolar, global political economic order versus a multipolar one with several spheres of influence. As a region, such times of potential systemic global change can provide both notable, deep-seated challenges and or potential opportunities to transform the lives of our people. Great leadership is needed from CARICOM to enable the region to successfully navigate these tumultuous times. When we at CPDC attempted to apply historical analysis of these global occurrences, we found an interesting anecdotal finding. History tells us that an analysis of the reserve currency since Portugal's reign, commencing in 1450s, reveals that there have been 6 major world reserve currency periods, each lasting an average of 95 to 100 years, and with the longest lasting 105 years. The countries holding the reserve currencies were Portugal, Spain, Netherlands, France, Great Britain, and United States from 1921 to today. And we would note that that time period is roughly 102 years, or just about in that area. A French leader, Emmanuel Macron, in an interview on April 9, 2023, cautioned Europe's heavy reliance on the extraterritoriality of the US dollar. Macron spoke to the issue of the increasing struggle for a unipolar versus multipolar world, particularly between China and the USA. These public views provide a rare glimpse into what appears to be an emerging trend in the global political sphere. This mirrors an apparent deepening of the Southern perspective, particularly in Asia and the BRICS, to move away from the dependence on the reserve currency in their bilateral trade. CARICOM, as the political decision-making body on regional policy development, faces a period where Caribbean sovereignty as we know it may be rapidly changing. I recall that a quote from 1967 on joining the United Nations, the late Alvaro, Prime Minister of Barbados at the time, made clear that Barbados and the Caribbean will be friends of all and satellites of none. The extent that our region still supports this view of Alvaro requires deeper analysis at the regional decision-making level. Oftentimes, we have little influence as nation states or as a region within global spaces. Notably, we saw the narrowing of our sovereign authority when a global corporate tax policy was developed and proposed by G7 nations for the world, although it was acknowledged that the region would be adversely impacted from reduced foreign direct investments. The policy, nevertheless, was reluctantly adopted by many Caribbean nations. The question then is, where are we headed as a region when such decisions are no longer primarily within our government's remit? To reiterate our position made during the UNCTAD 15 conference in 2021, civil society is of the view that such global policies are best ventilated and negotiated within international political institutions that provide us an opportunity to have a voice, and this, such as the United Nations as a platform. We strongly believe that unified CARICOM positions are needed to respond to such global political and economic issues in the future. Towards this reimagination of regional development, the Center also calls on the Secretariat and its institutions to offer greater input into the strategic direction of CARICOM. We understand the CARICOM Secretariat and institutions, by their political and intergovernmental nature, working on behalf and in partnership with national government processes and institutions, may take relatively longer periods to achieve desired outcomes and goals. However, if the envisioned CARICOM regional integration movement that we all seek is to be fully achieved, the time for rethinking the structure of the Secretariat and its institutions is at hand. This change may also be influenced by a reduction in grant financing from the European partners as the region experiences their own internal economic difficulties. We commend the CARICOM Secretariat for commencing this review process and providing the opportunity to make constructive, positive changes in the face of adversity. Going forward, civil society would hope for a nimble, flexible, and proactive approach to regional policy making and programming from the Secretariat and its associated institutions. CPDC envisages a leaner CARICOM committed to greater functionality and a continued delivery of projects and programs aimed at addressing priority regional issues. There exists a myriad of development concerns that confront our region, and a revitalized CARICOM Secretariat is central to addressing many of these matters. Our region readily acknowledges that many priority concerns ranging from climate change, high debt levels, food insecurity, and inadequate regional transportation. In this respect, civil society is heartened by the unity shown by CARICOM and our regional leaders at the COP27 and welcome the decision to establish a loss and damage facility. It is critical that CARICOM and all stakeholders maintain vigilance and pressure to ensure that the agreed fund is realized and it is indeed fit for purpose. This is but one example where collective action can successfully have outcomes that the region very much needs. We anticipate a similar commitment by the Secretariat to support and articulate for the Bridgetown Initiative, led by Barbadian Prime Minister the Honorable Mia Motley, for a more equitable international financial architecture. CPDC believes that the CARICOM Secretariat's work on reparations must be advanced with great urgency. We too believe that this is a critical component of future development of Caribbean development. We support and commend the CARICOM initiative to establish the CARICOM Reparations Commission and undertake the necessary human rights research and advocacy. Civil society is of the view that reparations hold great promise as a prerequisite source of financing to support our quest for a sustainable alternative development model. Under the auspices of CARICOM, the region must explore and develop its approach as to how such compensatory funds will be utilized and redound to the benefit of all African and indigenous descendants. Our view is that reparation funds should be used for disruptive initiatives that foster sustainability and change in our region, moving away from a heavy government-centric model to one where socioeconomic opportunities are provided to descendants of enslaved Africans and indigenous populations. We urge CARICOM and its reparatory commission to engage with civil society to strengthen the educational advocacy, lobbying efforts both at home and abroad for the justified calls for reparatory financing to transform our development. To examine CARICOM from a people's perspective, reflect on the level of participation and access given to stakeholders over the 30-year history of our organization. And at the risk of dating myself, I personally recall as a very young man attending my first heads of government meeting under the chairmanship of former St. Vincent and the Grenadines Prime Minister James Mitchell on the island of Canouan. At this time, a joint consultative committee consisting of regional representatives of labor, private sector, and non-governmental organizations were provided the opportunity to address the heads of governments. Over the years, there have been a number of formats and formulations to facilitate engagement of representatives of civil society within CARICOM. Our view is that more at this stage needs to be done. Now is the time for broad participation of civil society within regional policymaking and programming. Our sector is of the view that the next 50 years should be characterized by greater inclusion and meaningful engagement between civil society and CARICOM. For us, this is one of the critical areas of weakness of the CARICOM process that must be frontally addressed. Genuine regional integration requires the full participation of CARICOM citizens who must clearly identify and relate to the benefits of a united Caribbean. At a time where our region is facing numerous headwinds, now is the time for enhanced participation of civil society within CARICOM at all levels. In 1997, we engaged with and applauded CARICOM on the formulation and adoption of the Civil Society Charter. The Charter outlines the basic tenets for the inclusion of civil society in regional and national development. While we acknowledge the importance of the Charter, its implementation across Caribbean has been limited and generally inadequate. It has failed to strengthen civil society's institutional inclusion in CARICOM development to the extent that we would like to see. Our solution to this process is the review and implementation of a civil society regional strategic framework that was commissioned by CARICOM and undertaken by CPDC in 2010 to 2011. The framework was formulated after an exhaustive civil society consultative process in all CARICOM member states. In this document, several options for greater systemic inclusion of civil society at the CARICOM level were proffered, and these should be examined with a view of institutionalizing the relationship between civil society and CARICOM. After the full implementation of my apologies, we had some noise outside the office. After the full implementation of a revised strategic framework, CPDC believes the goal of Civil Society Charter may then be finally realized. Our organization looks forward to a time where our peoples have greater access and inclusion within regional policymaking programming. As stakeholders, we anxiously await a time in the future, like our other presenters and panel, where Caribbean peoples will fix our mindsets on terms like unity, equity, family, and brotherhood as we talk about our region. For us as civil society, we recognize the fact that the Caribbean is only as strong as we are united, and as weak as we are divided. CPDC stands ready with our members and partners to work hand in hand with CARICOM to achieve a collective vision for sustainable Caribbean development. I will wrap up there. Hopefully I haven't gone over by too much, and I look forward to receiving questions.
Spot on, Mr. Jones, with your 15 minutes. The organizers have allowed us to go a bit longer until 1 p.m. So I think this would allow us a bit of time to have a robust question and answer. So first up, I'm going to give you the 4 questions that I have thus far. And I'm going to allow each panelist to respond to the question they see fit and give any final comments or responses. So the first question that was submitted from the previous panel: what can be strategies for regional transport and logistics going forward? And I think this is part of some of the harsh realities we need to address going forward for the future. The second question: how would a CARICOM stock exchange network that unifies Barbados, Jamaica, and Trinidad and Tobago's stock exchange work for integration of a CARICOM's private sector? And is this being looked at in any way? So the second question relates to the CARICOM stock exchange network and whether one can unify the Barbados, Jamaica, and Trinidad exchange and what it would mean for the private sector. A question has been asked in terms of Dr. Gonzalez's scorecard. Would it be shared with participants? But I'm very interested in the methodology behind Dr. Gonzalez's scorecard. It is a fascinating document. I look forward to hearing a bit more of the methodology, especially the classification between CARICOM 2015 and 1973. Like, why was there specifically 2015? What was that reason behind that classification? And then the final question is, where can one find this data on CARICOM countries' level of compliance with and status of implementation of their regional commitments? Where can one find the data on CARICOM countries' level of compliance with and status of implementation of their regional commitments? Over to the panelists. We can start with the order based on the program. So Dr. Gonzalez.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. The first point about transportation, I think that is a very ticklish one, in that we have been trying to deal with regional transportation since CARICOM has been founded. I saw where, for instance, the recent commission that was established with Dr. Prasad and some other colleagues from the region, they advocated fast ferries as a way of dealing with this. And they showed that where you could buy a fast ferry for $50 million and it could be very effectively used. And some of the experience of the fast ferries that they referred to included what we have here in Trinidad between Tobago and Trinidad. We have 2 ferries and so on. I'm not sure to what extent that is a very useful model, because that is a highly subsidized operation. And the cost of those ferries, I think, go beyond $50 million. I don't want to quote a figure, but I think certainly it goes beyond 50 million. But that's a highly subsidized operation. And the Trinidad government has been studying this question of fast ferries for a long time, fast ferries to Grenada. They commissioned studies from various regional experts on this and so forth, and they have difficulty in showing how it could be operational, because the idea was to extend this to Grenada and St. Vincent and Barbados and so on. But it has not been done because of the cost limitations. Now, I see CARICOM is studying this, CARICOM and the CDB is studying this, and they're coming up with some ideas about certain clusters, like, from Suriname to Barbados, through Guyana and Trinidad and so on. You could have one and then another one to various areas. But I'm not an expert in that. I don't want to get too much involved in that. Just to say that it's a very difficult thing. It's the right thing. If you remember in the old colonial days, we had the West Indian boat that used to go up to Jamaica, and that was given to us by the Canadians, and it was heavily subsidized. I don't know, we haven't gone much further than that up to today. Let me deal with things that I know a little more about. As regards my presentation, let me say that all of what I've said is already published some years ago. It's there's scorecard thing, which has been published in the book by myself and Roger Hussain, on trade and development issues. There's an article I have there on Caribbean integration where all that I've said there is in there, and how the scorecard and methodology used with the scorecard was developed. Okay, so that is available. The other one with respect to commitments, how I get commitments from member states. I followed largely some of the things that Professor Govan did, and I also got some data from other regional organizations and from the IDB also had published certain things about some of these commitments. It's not an easy thing because CARICOM generally doesn't publish information on compliance and with their laws and so forth. They do that internally and they keep that documentation to themselves. That's another issue in terms of doing research because CARICOM doesn't share research. It's a very difficult thing to undertake this kind of research in the region, and that's why a lot of people don't do it, and I understand that. But I would say that go to CARICOM and try to insist that you get some of the work that they have done on compliance. They have done some serious work on compliance, and you may get some of the figures that you're looking for. I think that basically concerns me. There was a question of the stock market. Again, here I'm not an expert on that. I think I saw where in the recent report of that same commission out of Barbados, they spoke of the need for establishing criteria that would vet banks much better and which would allow companies to establish themselves much better. And in such a way, we have a sort of regional clearinghouse because we are running into this problem of de-risking. And they felt that if you have a regional clearinghouse where we could say that this bank is a bona fide bank and not involved in money laundering, et cetera, that would assist much better in terms of companies moving and registering in other countries and so forth. But as I said, I am not an expert on that and I prefer to remain quiet.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gonzalez. Professor, would you care to?
Thank you. To address the regional transportation question, on the one hand, we have bought into the notion that government is not supposed to subsidize these things, but at the same time, we also are aware that government should invest in things that the private sector is not investing. Okay, so government should be on the margins only when the private sector is not investing in something. And transportation is such an obvious one. If there was a huge profitable private sector market for air travel that connects the smallest and most marginal Caribbean islands, either in the air or by air or sea, they would already exist. And the fact that they don't exist, then it would suggest by that same logic of government only jumping in when the private sector can't do it, that's an area that has to be subsidized. We drank the Kool-Aid and we thought that we should not have subsidized LIAT, that Jamaica should not have subsidized Air Jamaica, that the Trinidad government, well, it continues to subsidize Caribbean Airlines. And we bought into this. If we are not prepared to put our money to support the things that we think are important, who else is going to do it? So I don't see how, whether it's air or a ferry service, how we can think that we can have a service like that without government involvement. I would love to hear what CARICOM what they're considering and what their proposals are like. But frankly, I don't see it happening. I mean, we can beg Canada to pay for it. We can beg somebody else to pay for it, like we beg for everything else. But I think ultimately, if this is something that we think is important, we have to find resources to fund it, or at least support it. I will not comment. I can't comment on the stock exchange, only to say that I remember some years ago, somebody complaining that all the talk about a regional stock exchange for CARICOM totally ignored the fact that the Eastern Caribbean, the OECS countries already have a stock exchange. And the idea of looking at how it works and basically using it as the model was never really considered seriously because it's not happening in Barbados, Trinidad, or Jamaica. I don't know how much substance there is in that, but the question is, is the wheel to be invented, or is there already a basis that can work? But as I said, I'm not really qualified to speak to this.
Thank you so much, Professor, for your contribution. Mr. Jones.
Yes, I'd say that the questions really are probably not in our area of expertise. But I do support Professor Lewis's position that the transportation issue is a critical one, a vital one for the Caribbean. And we may have to look at a model that does include subsidies to continue or to ensure that we have that basic infrastructure in place that can drive regional integration. As an institution ourselves, we are having significant challenges organizing regional events, regional activities at this present time due to the high cost and the limited availability of transportation. So as an institution, we see it really every day, and it does reduce our ability to connect with our members and partners and their beneficiaries, because oftentimes we're talking about persons who would not readily have access to the mobile data and so forth to be engaging with us. So it is proving to be challenging. It is an area that I think requires a strategic thinking and investment from our leaders, and certainly we would support some level of government involvement in that process as well. I want to also speak to a broader issue that I've been hearing from the panel this morning, right through I think to ours, and that is how do we get people involved in the CARICOM process and integrated into it. I think this is something that we all discuss, and I've been attending many CARICOM meetings, and I've been hearing this discussion and dialogue happen. I recall that in under the 10th EDF, we had done a program, civil society program with the CARICOM Directorate, and it did include a component to set up a civil society desk that would be the interlocutor between civil society, well, any civil society organizations across the Caribbean or groupings to CARICOM in its programming and its work. And unfortunately, even after the resources were set aside, it never happened. There were some political differences that prevented that from being implemented, much to our regret and concern. I think we firstly need political will to engage. And I agree with Professor Lewis, not only formal institutions, but also with civil society in general. I still am of the opinion that civil society institutions need to be that interlocutor. And we can be talking about labor unions, we can be talking about community organizations, we can be talking about more structured organizations and regional organizations such as CPDC as well. But I think we all need to come together and find a way that we can relate and be part of the CARICOM experiment in the coming 50 years. And that's something that's definitely needed. I also believe that it needs to be the requisite institutional mechanisms within the CARICOM Secretariat itself, so that they can be, I say, regular, quote unquote, regular engagement between civil society in its different and diverse aspects, and the CARICOM Secretariat in their programming on whether it's climate change, high debt levels, regional transportation. We do need to see civil society sort of owning a lot of the policies that come out of CARICOM. And I agree with Dr. Gonzalez. Sometimes it is quite difficult to get information, and we hear about policies sometimes after they are implemented. I have to say that sometimes we are invited in the process at various stages, but still too often we hear about these policies after they have been adopted by the heads. So I think there is much scope and room for including people and including the average Caribbean citizen, whichever vehicles that we use. But I think civil society will still be an indispensable part of that process.
Thank you so much for that, Mr. Jones. And I'm coming right back to you with a question that was placed in the chat. What do you think a strategy for greater engagement with civil society within CARICOM would look like? Do you think that there's a greater need for fostering a greater awareness of CARICOM and an allegiance to a Caribbean identity by the youth or people on the ground, by greater exposure as by the media, as was mentioned previously, or even creating annual academic competitions among secondary and primary schools and avenues for student exchanges across the region beyond the tertiary level? How do you think grassroots engagement should look like?
Yeah, that's just a good question. It's all of the above. I think the question pretty much answers itself. I would support actually all those things. And we do need for the average Caribbean citizen to see CARICOM and understand CARICOM through their daily lives. I have to say as well that we do need to have national buy-in by governments. There will be a role for some governments in this process. I mean, for each of their countries in helping to commence the process and getting civil society involved to then go and do that work. But yeah, certainly all of those actions I think are needed. I think we need as well the formal institutional arrangement where CARICOM, let's say, meets with civil society and its representatives each year to discuss the regional priority issues and provide CARICOM the opportunity to hear from civil society and its perspective and views to help inform policy making within CARICOM itself. But certainly at the grassroots level, we do need to see those activities happening in each national jurisdiction to engage. When we did the regional strategic framework assignment, we held multiple national consultations and focus groups as well within communities, all types of communities. We brought in that respect, private sector, labor, each community organizations, communities themselves. And that's, I think, the type of engagement that we need in helping shape a view and a vision for a new Caribbean. They call it a new Caribbean separated from the old. So we're looking to the future. And we do need to see the next step of CARICOM being meaningfully accepted and adopted by the average Caribbean person.
Thank you so much, Mr. Jones. To Dr. Gonzalez and Professor Lewis, there's a question. Does the panel believe that a proposal for a harmonized foreign direct investment framework is possible? One which enshrines employment of qualified CARICOM nationals, protection of the environment, including the economic and social governance rules. So is there a possibility for a harmonized FDI framework within the region?
Let me see. Well, we started off with some kind of agreement, some kind of basic agreement on foreign direct investment. But as we went along, it seemed to have just receded in the background. I don't think it was updated, and that we end up having a lot of competition among the member states for foreign investment. It's extremely difficult to get agreement on incentives for foreign investment and on taxation on foreign investment. And as you see in this region, there's a kind of competition that goes along here in terms of attracting foreign investment. Every country believes that foreign investment that goes to one country should have come to their country, and that there's that kind of competition. But I know CARICOM has been making some efforts. I am not sure if you could deal with all of those issues, as for instance, taking into account the environment, given differences that we may have on this question of the environment. I would say that it is probably worth trying, but I'm not sure of the kind of success that you're likely to have. If you do have something, it may be a kind of watered down thing. Under certain conditions, you may get X, Y, or Z to work, but you may not be able to get it to work in a very comprehensive way. So that's basically what I would say about that. We have been at this a long time. I will say we have been at this question of upgrading that old foreign investment agreement. It's how many years? We are probably at this over 40-something years, what we just spoke about here.
Yeah. Okay. I would say a harmonized FDI policy is absolutely necessary. And it's a shame that we don't have that one already. We have just signed up, we negotiated the post-Cotonou agreement, right? Which is full of investment. The EU wants to invest in every potential area that can be invested in. We do what is, it's not really clear what we want. We talk about, yeah, there's lip service to higher value added, you know, up the chain, but there's nothing that operationalizes this. There's nothing that is concrete in the way in which the questioner raised to ensure that investment redounds to our benefits rather than just follows the same extractivist model of everything we do. So absolutely, we're way behind in terms of how crucial that is. And every new agreement is signing away even more of our birthright, right? And that brings me to the question that you can see the regional integration as being a space to protect and to allow people to grow and thrive, or to be a space where the region is delivered wholesale to foreign interests. And we have to be very careful about that and what we want. But I want to come to the question of grassroots democracy, because I think that's very important. I see grassroots democracy is not just being related to CARICOM, but as playing a potentially powerful role in breaking that kind of deadlock that we have inherited, that polarizing constitutional model we have inherited between the opposition and the government, in a context where we need all hands on deck. We really need to think about the Caribbean we want, and that cannot be the government in power leading this, and then the opposition, when it is in power, leading it in a different direction, or in the same direction, but pretending it's in a different direction. And that can only be addressed if you have a genuinely inclusive project that speaks to people, that puts issues on the tables, that allows them to generate issues, and have everybody so that people can feel ownership of these ideas. And, you know, whether people have a Caribbean identity or not, I mean, I think that's less a question. Yeah, I'm a Grenadian first. Still, I'm a Grenadian. That's what shaped me. But I'm Caribbean because, you know, for lots of reasons. But for a lot of people, you know, if they can't travel to the Caribbean, you know, what does it mean? If, you know, their lives are not improved, you know, what does it mean to be part of the Caribbean?
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Professor. And to the panelists, thank you very much for your thought-provoking presentations. The discussion has been absolutely lovely. As we look forward and we project into the next 50 years, I want to end on a positive, because I like to see that when we in academia take initiatives, the rest of the stakeholders in our societies respond. And we have been talking about transparency and sharing of information, and posted in the chat, a CARICOM Secretariat Representative, Wania, has posted the most recent link to the CSME implementation plan. And the link is there. If you click on it, it takes you directly to the website where you can see the state of play of the region's implementation of the CSME. And Wania has stated in her contribution, this has been updated since, and by next month, the updated version will be uploaded on the website. So we make calls and action has already been served. So thank you so much for the panelists and to the audience for staying with us, and to the Institute for this amazing activity as we look forward to the next 50 years. Over to you, Dr. LaGuardia. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much to all the panelists and particularly to Dr. Kayan Skiri that is always helping and supporting any type of invitations. We do great sharing for panel 2. We only have 5 minutes to end this session because I would like to invite all of you to our youth forum that is going to be happening from 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. We have been talking a lot today about young people and young people contributions to Caribbean regional integration and CARICOM. And this afternoon, we actually had put together a forum for young people representatives to have the opportunity to come forward and talk a little bit about what they would like to get from this Caribbean integration. We also have a keynote speaker, a very young minister in the Caribbean that I believe will bring a tremendous contribution to this forum. But I just would like to end 3 minutes with what I believe are important notes of after this morning session. First, I believe all the presentations were remarkable. Definitely a really impressive summary about CARICOM experience, CARICOM lessons, and CARICOM way going forward. I like the idea said by one of the panelists that CARICOM is important. Actually, this is what we had in our minds when trying to invite all the presenters, the experts, and launch this reflection about CARICOM after 50 years. And I'm happy to see that if there is a consensus today is that we believe CARICOM is important, and also the fact that I believe we all agree on the idea that regional integration is not and cannot be an end by itself. It has to serve to something, and I believe that the challenges that you have identified today are very useful, provide very useful guidelines to indicate how and what is important in this way moving forward. I also would like to stress the idea of not only the new challenges that CARICOM has, but also to connect them with the global challenges that we all have, being in the Caribbean and being and being part of this planet. Definitely climate change is at the very top of our emergencies, but we also we have an urgency to work in terms of addressing other issues that are also global concerns. Food security is a major issue for the Caribbean, but it's not only a problem in the Caribbean. The digital economy and the transformation of the economy, definitely something we need to address. This informatization of society, the digital gap, all of that are Caribbean problems, but also global problems. And I believe we have an extra challenge because we are small island developing states, and the way these global problems reflect and translate into our Caribbean realities demand an extra effort and a particular creative and a particular will for us to be able to cope with them and transcend them somehow. At the same time, I'm very happy to see that today the panelists address the very long pending problems and goals CARICOM has. And I'm glad to see that the economy is still at the center of our main concerns, and definitely to rethink the CSME, to rethink the possibilities for Caribbean economies to integrate and to have a better prospect in this very uncertain future is something that was discussed today, and definitely learned a lot from the panelist presentations on that area. And something and this is my final point, something that I'm really grateful to have seen, and I believe is quite important, is to bring attention to what CARICOM is for in terms of the people it is supposed to serve, and the diversity of the Caribbean people, and the importance to understand the vulnerabilities and the marginalized groups in the Caribbean, and the many gaps we have in terms of serving Caribbean people and the role of CARICOM. I believe that was quite stressed today, and this is one of the key messages I believe that CARICOM should take in moving forward. I was happy to see that Secretary General talked about upgrading CARICOM, kind of revisiting CARICOM mechanisms and see how it could work better for all of us. And I hope that this session was fruitful for all of us to think about it, and more important, for all of us to think on how we can contribute to make that to happen. Because as you have said, nobody's going to do it for us. It has to be a collective effort. So I appreciate very much your effort, individual effort today to be here, and we hope that we can work together on moving forward. So see you at 2, I hope. Thanks everyone again, and we hope to continue this conversation in other fora. Bye-bye.